Everyone knows that Sonic had a literally perfect transition into 3D, and then a rocky transition into Shadow the Hedgehog. Everyone also knows that Sonic music is rad as hell. Look at the comment section to any OST upload of any Sonic song, and the comment section will praise it, no matter what it is. As every Sonic fan knows, no matter how bad the game may be, the soundtrack will always be good. But is it really true? Today I'm going to be ranking every single soundtrack in the series from worst to best. Let's cover the rules real quick. When I say every soundtrack, I'm going to be talking about the soundtrack included with a copy of any given game. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is 2 cartridges, so it has 2 soundtracks, that being Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles. I will not be counting the combined Sonic 3 and Knuckles soundtrack, even though some may consider it to be one thing. Same for Sonic CD. Sonic CD Japanese and Sonic CD American are 2 separate soundtracks and will not be combined. The only time I'll break this rule is if there's borderline no difference between the 2 soundtracks, like I believe is the case with Sonic Lost World, 3DS, and Wii U. Colors DS and Colors Wii have the same soundtrack, but because the DS version is compressed and bad and has some tracks missing, it follows the different cartridges rule and is ranked separately. But if there's no audio quality or track differences for something like the PS3 and Xbox versions of Sonic 06, they're the same. Common sense, really. I'm including everything in the Sonic Encyclopedia with the addition of Sonic Eraser, Sonic X Leapster, The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic Frontiers, and Sonic Origins. And as of recording, Sonic Origins Plus hasn't come out yet, so I really hope there's not more music in that one. And as of editing, they're the exact same soundtrack, so keep that in mind. But I'm not including crossover games. If I counted any Mario and Sonic games, I'd have to include the most recent 3 Smash Bros. Games, and that's just not a fair competition. Same logic will apply to the Sega All-Stars racing games, any Genesis compilation that features non-Sonic games, Sonic Pinball Party, you know, things like that. And the other games I'm not including are the Sonic Cafe mobile games. This is because they're mostly lost media, and there's somewhere between like 1 and none of their soundtracks that are accessible. Forgive me, the only single song I could find came from Sonic Golf DX, and it's called Stroke Mode, and it's a banger. I feel like I'm missing out on a cavalcade of brilliance, but I can only do so much. But since that opens the how do I rank collections can of worms, yes, I'm including collections, but I'm not including the soundtracks of the ROMs they include. I'm not giving Sonic Mega Collection a guaranteed #1 spot because it features Sonic 1, 2, and 3 and K, but I will be ranking its unique menu music. This, once again, makes it so I can't include Sonic 3 and Knuckles as one game, even though there's a ROM in Origins that combines them and gives them a unique soundtrack. I'm not ranking the ROMs, and 3 and K was only officially released as 2 games. This has the added benefit of making it so I don't have to listen to the Sonic 3 PC soundtrack or the beta soundtrack included in Origins. I will only consider the songs that are exclusive to that collection as its soundtrack. And finally, I'm sticking with official releases. I'm not counting beta soundtracks or cancelled or unreleased games. I'm trying to keep this project realistic. Now, I trust you all read the title of the video and know that I'm not ranking the games or considering the games in any way in these rankings. I'm ranking these soundtracks as their own isolated experiences as music and not as video game music. Don't be surprised when I don't put Sonic Blast in the top 10. I know it's the best Sonic game, but I'm ranking the soundtrack, not the game. Also, keep in mind that I won't even pretend to have a shred of objectivity. I don't believe in objectivity. If you came here to have your opinions reaffirmed or to see fan consensus, be prepared to not get that. I have definite genre bias, and I'm a Sonic fan, and be real with yourself. Does a Sonic fan with good opinions really exist? If she does, I'm not that girl. My last couple videos had comments like, your opinion sucks so much, I disagree and hate you so much, but the video's good, thanks. And I intend to keep that contrarian streak going. Talk about a low-budget intro. I'm outta here. Number 90. Every McDonald's LCD Sonic game. I'm sorry that Rogue and Emmy Tennis can't be placed higher. Number 89. Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric. Hey look, it's the first instance of genre bias, and also the worst real Sonic soundtrack in my opinion. I find no entertainment value in this type of cinematic classical music. No musical enjoyment, no comedic enjoyment. This is devoid of joy. This has provided me nothing but 2 wasted hours of my life. This is less than worthless. 116 tracks, and none are good. 88. Sonic Jam for the Gamecom. This has comedic value, but musical value? In the negatives. The Gamecom was incapable of producing music, so surprise surprise, this isn't. 87. Sonic Chronicles. Chronic Sonicles is the most infamous game in the entire series for its soundtrack, and for good reason. There's some actually putrid, downright painful, and some that are actually listenable. Bad, but good in comparison. Points of refuge from listening to the whole soundtrack. The points of refuge were the intro, which sounded like a 240p 3 Days Grace rip on YouTube from 2006, the main theme, Kron Colony Zone, and the one I'm not legally allowed to say, Zoa Colony Zone, Voxai Colony Zone Beta, battle win and battle lose, and in fact, most of the battle themes are generally pretty good. I wish I could pronounce any of the colony names. But you're not here to hear my positive takes on this soundtrack, you want the bad stuff. Green Hill Zone is comically bad. Every note is randomly placed in pizzicato to the point of being headache-inducing. Multiple of the songs after it have this funny problem where the bass drum is all the way to the left and the right is literally nothing, so you just have this knocking sound destroying your left ear while everything else is centered, or worse, also left-panned. You have no idea how painful it is to get through 3 songs in a row where my left ear feels like it's being deafened, and my right ear feels deaf because nothing's coming through it. 2009 Beatles remaster sounding asses were trying to give me a headache intentionally. The instrument choices they had were absolutely abysmal across the board. The DS is more than capable of having good instruments. The Kirby games reused the GBA sound font they had and managed to make some good stuff out of it. Pokemon and Ace Attorney used similar sound fonts, and they're all-time classics and aged past the systems they were on. And by the time you got to Bowser's Inside Story, you begin to realize that you can't blame the DS for this. The only reason this game sounds as bad as it does is because they were intentionally using shitty instruments and panned them horribly and played every note too short. These are not faults of the hardware, but faults of whichever composer didn't know how to mix anything. And not to mention the straight up dissonant bass notes that occur in more songs than you'd think. The first time you hear this, it has comedic value. After that, it's just pathetic. At least Sonic Jam Gamecom had the hardware excuse and comedic value. I gotta say though, it's hard to blame the composer Steven Sim for any of this at all. Every one of his original tracks are better than every one of his covers. The intro, battle themes, and all of that, you can see a noticeable and drastic difference in quality. The worst songs in a game are the covers, with the exception of Green Hill, which is actually an original track, and again is really bad. I'm nearly entirely sure that the bad songs, which are the stage themes and our covers, were the result of ungodly time restraints, because the original tracks are so competent and the covers are the opposite. I want to be the first person in history to pour one out for the poor soul in charge of this game's music. You are more than capable of producing better work than this, and you've proven so, and there's no way that this was the result of your incompetence. 86, Sonic Eraser. As much as I want to ironically defend this, I take these lists seriously. It has 3 songs, and they're all 4 out of 10s. 85, Sonic Schoolhouse. Another one I want to ironically defend. The credits are comedy gold though. There's multiple songs with desynced percussion, and it's funny every time. 84, Sonic Spinball for the Genesis. Good lord. Toxic Caves got my hopes up. I really liked it, but now I see why it's the only song from the game I've ever heard aside from the infamously horrible Options menu theme. The rest of this game's soundtrack is exactly as bad as Options, if not worse. The Machine is potentially the worst song I've heard in the entire series, and it's like 8 minutes long. How did they do it? This is genuinely painful stuff. The best way I could describe this game's soundtrack is fart reverb sound effects. 83, Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. This is very much not my thing. It's got a somewhat tribal sound, and it's not really anything I associate with Sonic. Trap Tower's pretty good, so if you're a fan of funky stuff that's in no way catchy, definitely check that one out. Quick Escape is okay also. My favorite song in the game is easily the Staff Roll, because it's relatively fun and catchy. But if you want to fester in my negativity, the worst song in the game is Eggman's Tower. Listen to that, and if you don't get why I hate it, then just accept that I have bad taste. I know I do. 82, Sonic Rivals. I'm being bored to death, and this is my murderer. Meteor Base Zone is the only tolerable act in the entire game. 81, Sonic Rivals 2. This is Sonic Rivals, but slightly better. But also Frontier Canyon specifically is ear-grating. It has Race to Win, which is good, but it gets annoying if it's looped more than once. 80, Sonic CD US. Alright, now hear me out. This is clearly some people's thing, but it's not mine. This is a soundtrack that's far too atmospheric for its own good. It does not stand on its own at all. Every single one of these songs are background music and nothing more. Every track is so unbelievably boring to me, it's actually impressive. Next to none of them are ear-grating or anything, but I would not so much as move my head to a single one of these. The redeeming zones are Palm Tree Panic, which is unique for having virtually no differences between the present, good future, bad future, and past variants, Stardust Speedway, which is almost quality music, and Metallic Madness Present, which is probably my favorite level theme in the game. There's 3 songs I prefer in the soundtrack to the JP one, the unnecessarily scary sounding boss music, which is comical in the context of the game because it's used for the easiest bosses in platformer history, the special stage theme, and the level clear theme. And you know it's not my thing when I think the 10-second level clear jingle is better than most of the songs in the game. 79, Sonic Riders. I listened to the soundtrack expecting anything good and I got one singular song, and it's Theme of Sega Carnival, which I'm not entirely sure originates in the game itself. But it's on the Spotify album, so whatever. The breakcore EDM vibe the whole thing has is so unbelievably boring, or as Rate Your Music calls it, acid trance. trash genre. There's no melodies in the entire soundtrack with the exception of the 2 orchestral tracks that are so forgettable I'm not entirely sure I'm about to name the right tracks. I think they are Theme of Babylonian and The Real Treasure. But I could be wrong. I was so fully convinced that Sonic Speed Riders was the worst vocal track in the series, but then this take on Catch Me If You Can was somehow worse. How did they do it? And if you thought it couldn't get worse, the Rockin' Beats mix has a synth cover of the Crazy Bus theme. The chorus has a nice chord progression, but it's surrounded by hot garbage. I actually cannot exaggerate how bad this soundtrack is. It's technically listenable, but like, barely. I'd say if you want to know precisely what I dislike, the theme of Green Cave is probably the worst song in the game. I really am sorry for anyone who likes this genre. You might like it, but not me. This is dog shit in my opinion. 78, Waku Waku Sonic Patrol Car. It's just 3 songs from Sonic 1. They're slightly worse renditions of Green Hill, the mini-boss theme, and Stage Clear. They're just middies of pretty good songs. Big game for fans of Green Hill police car sounds and Sonic voice though. 77, Sonic Origins. It's 3 songs and none of them are particularly good. The best song involved with this game is the Hyper Potions trailer music, but that doesn't count because it was not used in the game to my knowledge. If I was counting the 3 in Knuckles ROM like Sonic's mixtapes on YouTube's did, it'd be higher. But I had that whole intro for a reason. 76, Sonic Jam for the Saturn. I'm gonna be honest, I had to listen to this one twice and I remember none of it. Not a lick. Except the remix of File Select from Sonic 3, but that's just because the original song is one of my favorites, so of course I remember it. And that does not bode well. If the best song in the game is a remix of a song from another game, the soundtrack clearly has very little value on its own. 75, Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal. Unlike Rise of Lyric, there were a few songs in here that sounded like music I'd listened to outside of the game's context, which is good because I'm not playing the game. I'd play Shattered Crystal like 10 times before touching Rise of Lyric, sure, but I'd also rather touch Salmonella from Ace Attorney than that game, so... 74, Sonic Battle. I want to say for the record that my method of determining these placements has one major flaw. Something that's generally the worst thing of all time can be saved by a few good tracks. This was one of those times. Sonic Battle has more than a dozen songs that genuinely hurt me. The sound font they use for this game is so absolutely abhorrent that it oftentimes gives me an actual headache. While listening to the first, 7 minutes of the soundtrack, I couldn't stop wincing in actual pain. The guitar sound they were using for the menu music was hurting me. It was so viscerally unpleasant. I've somehow never used the term nails on a chalkboard in any of my scripts before, and I couldn't possibly come up with a better time to use it than right here. And yet, unlike every soundtrack to this point, there's at least one good song. In fact, there's a couple. Emerald Town was the first point of reprieve I got from the torment of listening to this. The song called Fee Theme was overlong, but was otherwise one of the first times I enjoyed myself. Holly Summit was one of the most relaxing ones, because all of the instruments they were using were not ear grating. I want to say for the record that the GBA sound chip was not equipped for what the majority of Sonic composers were using it for. This game is one of the worst offenders, because the instruments they chose were god-awful, and I cannot stress enough how physically painful they are. I'm not exaggerating when I say it hurt. It literally did with headphones. So I'm eternally grateful when songs like Holly Summit use instruments like peaceful synths, or whistles, or square waves. Then it's followed up by a song called Chow Ruins, which is some really weird swing rock tune that's happy and upbeat. Like, imagine naming a song The Last Remnant of a Generation of Deceased, and it's the Can-Can. Unsurprisingly to me, Club Rouge is easily my favorite song in the game, by a long shot. It's a super funky jazz song with acoustic guitar sounding things that are genuinely funky as hell. The bass line is brilliant, the odd sexual voices fit Rouge as a character, and the synth sound in the background is sexy and smooth. Yeah, Rouge, as you will find out by the end of this list, has consistently my favorite songs and everything she's a part of. Her musical identity consists of the swankiest and grooviest jazz you've ever heard in your entire life. And it's always an absolute treat. Amy's Room, on the other hand, isn't backed by some long-held character tradition of a musical identity, but it still does make sense. Name one bad Amy song, I dare you. Amy's Room isn't one of them, if you're wondering. It's cute. I like it a lot. Library, on the other hand, gotta be the best character in Sonic history. Library has the best character progression of all time, just amazing arcs everywhere. So of course Library gets a banger theme. But yeah, Sonic Battle. Not good as a whole, salvaged by a few pretty good ones. 73, Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. This has all of the same problems as Sonic Riders. Most of the soundtrack consists of songs that are all drums and static bass lines with the occasional droning chord. I see absolutely no appeal to this as music. Aquatic Time is close to music. The Divine Wings is a cutscene song that I wouldn't consider completely unlistenable on its own. I'm not often in the mood for orchestral stuff, but I'll take it a million times over Gadget Round, that's for sure. The core has a nice B section that makes it the best non-vocal song on here, except for whatever Blast Town is. Don't know if that's just a funny little thing Spotify included, but it's got a level of energy and fun that the rest of the soundtrack is missing, and Multi-Attack isn't horrible. The rest, though, actually horrible. But really, I think it says a lot that the Divine Wings, the Lightless Black, and Step Into the Black Hole are some of my favorites on the soundtrack, because they're songs designed for cutscenes. When I'd rather listen to the atmospheric cutscene music than whatever plays during the actual game, I think it speaks volumes to the in-game music's quality. But again, every one of these songs I've praised, I have absolutely no interest in and would never listen to again. They're just better than the rest of the stuff. So why is it higher than Sonic Riders, Ungravitify, and Catch Me If You Can? They're actually some of the best vocal tracks in the series. Again, gotta clarify, only the Catch Me If You Can from this game. Both versions of Catch Me If You Can from the original Sonic Riders soundtrack suck the genital of your preference. But this game's version is an actual banger. The chorus is really, really catchy. Ungravitify, on the other hand, is a solid contender for my favorite vocal track in this series, depending on how wrong I feel that particular day. It's not often you hear a Sonic song with a tenor vocalist, but this one does, and he absolutely nails it. 72, Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter. This game existing is the most fun thing about it. The soundtrack isn't bad though, there's a couple good ones. Nobody can agree on the names, so I'm going solely off the number of them in the sound test. Sound test number 2, sometimes called the boss theme, is easily my favorite in the game. It's actually a banger. There's no particularly bad tracks on here, but number 2 is the only one that rises to the occasion of being considered great. 71, Sonic Spinball for the Game Gear. A massive improvement from the Genesis version, mostly because of instead of using fart reverb sound effects as the only instrument, this uses the limited Game Gear sound chip, which isn't capable of producing fart reverb sound effects. It's still got a grand total of 0 good tracks though. None of the tracks are unlistenable or anything, they're just bland and boring. This is the most passable soundtrack I've ever heard. Toxic Pools, the game's Toxic Cave equivalent, is once again the best song in the game. It's got some pretty funky chords. 70, Tales in the Music Maker. In the year 20XX, a super furry named Andrew Man dies of Pico. The Sega Pico, of course, which is an educational console with a really, really bad sound chip, I think. They might have just literally made this soundtrack bad and annoyingly pizzicato intentionally. I don't know. But, do you want a game full of really bad chiptune takes of classical music? Oh, your answer is no? Oh, well, this game would have been the game for you. But, I mean, okay. There's like 5 unique swing songs, 2 of which are actual bangers, one of them is trash, but the other 3 are okay. Wait, that's 6. That adds up to 6. My bad. The game does not feature Claire de Lune, but it does feature a surprisingly good take on Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Please just let me move on. 69, Sonic Freeriders. This is one of those times that I need to remind you I'm talking about the soundtracks when I say the following sentence. Sonic Freeriders is easily the best of the 3 Riders games. It does not have the best individual tracks. Free is a pretty good vocal track, but it's no Ungravitify, and none of the instrumentals are particularly great. But a majority of this game's soundtrack is listenable. The soundtrack has an aura of fun to it that the other Riders games are completely devoid of. Rocky Ridge alone is dumb as hell, using stupid vocal samples and managing to be somewhat entertaining because of it. Metropolis Freeway and Metal City are examples of what the other 2 Riders should have been. And that's all I really have to say. I still don't like this genre, but this one's more listenable than the other 2 games. 68, Sonic Genesis GBA. Ah, Sonic 1, a classic. Timeless songs that'll go down in video game history as some of the best ever. Mix that with the GBA, home of one of the worst sound chips in a major video game console, and you get even worse than you can imagine. This game, and subsequently its soundtrack, is comedy gold. It's so bad for no reason. Take these timeless songs and use the worst MIDI instruments, occasionally mess up the mixing and panning, and some wrong notes for good measure. It's brilliant. Sonic Genesis doesn't necessarily tarnish the original's legacy or anything. In fact, there's like 1 song on here on par with the original, the special stage theme. But it's such a massive downgrade otherwise that it's actually impressive. This was actually the last soundtrack I listened to during this project. I listened mostly in release order, but I forgot this one existed. What a way to end this journey though, right? 67, Tails Adventure. This soundtrack is largely boring. It's got a lot of marching snare and it's kind of childish and kiddie throughout. Very few tracks stand out among the crowd. World Map and Sea Fox were both absolute bangers. Really got the adventure vibe down hard on those. The rest of them seem like they'd be right at home for a Dora the Explorer game. This is very much not my thing, and I don't think I'll offend anyone if I say that. 66, Tails Sky Patrol. I'd be embarrassed to place this any higher. This is the kind of soundtrack that you can't knock but would never want to try. It's the kind of music you jam out to, but only in private, because doing it in public would be your social demise. Nearly every track in this game is dumb and embarrassing, but I wouldn't call any of it bad. For one of the most inaccessible and obscure soundtracks, I'm shocked that it has some good stuff in it. The music peaks at Ruinwood area, and it's 3 tracks, but Dark Castle isn't a slouch either. 65, Sonic the Hedgehog's Game World. Given how limited the Sega Pico was, as we saw with Tales in the Music Maker, this is pretty damn impressive. There's some actual songs in here, it's pretty cool. It's not peak music or anything, there's nothing in here I'd be like, yeah, I gotta hear that again, but there's nothing bad here. This is a solid listen for a Sonic educational game. 64. Sonic Dash. These are just the worst versions of good songs from the series. They're mostly electronic remixes of post-adventure Sonic games, some songs literally being directly lifted from Generations. It's this low because it's lazy, mostly. The Eggman theme is probably the best song in the game because it's at least a superior version of the Sonic Adventure song it's remixing. 63. Sonic Boom Fire and Ice. This is the best mainline Sonic Boom soundtrack, unsurprisingly. There's a few tracks I'd recommend, especially to the fans of Richard Jock and his work on specifically 3D Blast Saturn. I get a lot of 3D Blast Saturn vibes from this. He was the composer for the whole Boom sub-series, and while he did a really shit job on these games, he's absolutely a fantastic composer, as his work on the 90s Sonic games were oftentimes divine. The good tracks in this game are Kodiak Frontier Map, Paleo Tar Pits, Tar Pit Depths, Ragnarok Map, some of the Gothic Gardens, and some of Thunder Island. But then Fisher Tunnel came on, and I started jamming. Fisher Tunnel has some great stuff. There's some good stuff, but nothing particularly special, and once again, quite a few boring tracks, but still a clear improvement from the other two Boom games. 62. Sonic Shuffle. I'm not entirely sure that this game's soundtrack wasn't entirely created by an AI, with song titles like Dark Sharpener, Wake Up One, Hi Tata, Go with V-Train, How Are You, Blizzard of Coast, Cloggy Dance, and Stormy Y. And if you thought this game's randomly generated vibe was exclusive to its titles, no. Dark Sharpener was in particular the first time I noticed it, but then Wake Up One reaffirmed it. Songs like the intro, which is a banger, and the immortal Live on Walnuts are pretty good. Spicy C sounds like Splatoon music if the distorted vocals were replaced with samples of 60s television shows. Hi Tata is somehow a weirder song than it is a title. This has some good stuff, but it's surrounded by relatively unimpressive and usually straight up confusing songs. The soundtrack was still leaning on the electronic elements of the late 90s era Sonic games, which was far from my favorite direction the series took. I'd say this game's soundtrack is mostly important for its comedic value. Sombrero samples a guy screaming in pain with a duck quack. It's funny and stupid. The comment section was like, it sounds like someone's taking a shit, which isn't necessarily far off. And that's one of the more compositionally conventional. Many of the other songs have melody lines that use the Crazy Bus style of composition. This soundtrack is funny in the way that Sonic Jam Gamecom was, but it actually has some musicality occasionally. I don't know what to make of it, quite honestly. Some of the best songs in the game just sound like I Need Help Immediately by 100 Gex. Feel Noisy is really funny, it's one of those, because it's got a fine trumpet melody and then it plays some offbeat Android ringtone sounding thing. And then Earthquake has this really funky bass line in the middle. Bitter Tears is a really fascinating song because it's emotional, but refuses to break free from the AI curse. And the same applies to Open Space. From Birth, one of the best titles in the game, has a nice bass line and it ends a little too quickly. Quick Attack and Ever Quiet have really funky bass lines that make them stand out. In terms of my favorites, I'm definitely going to go with the intro and Summer Mirage, which is the credits theme. Those are both really great songs and actually sound like Sonic instead of acid in music form. It fits Sonic Shuffle quite well, because just like the game, it makes no sense, I don't really like it, and it's Sonic Shuffle. 61. The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. This game's a really odd one. On one hand, I dare say the music's perfect. It fits the game so perfectly it's almost unsettling. Each and every song has a style and feel that perfectly encapsulates the locations and characters inside them. But on the other, I don't care for a single one of these tracks. I have so much respect for the soundtrack, but I just don't like it. There's a heavy use of leitmotif, which is cool, but it can make things feel a little stale. The interrogation theme, for example, has multiple variants, one for each character you're interrogating, where there are minor instrument changes that reflect the location they're in. It's really cool. Unfortunately, I don't like the interrogation theme by itself, so I'm not jamming out to each one. I'm kinda just like, well, there's the interrogation theme again. It makes it hard to notice the changes in my opinion, since a lot of them are definitely quite minor. There's two specific locations that are very close to being really good songs in my opinion. The Saloon Car, which is a brilliant ragtime tune that's very fun, and the Casino Car. Oh my god, Rouge, I love your outfit so goddamn much. You're so great in this game. But also, wowee, Casino Car has some banger music. I love that Rouge is consistently associated with the best music in the series. I love that for her. I also really like the Dream Gear theme. It really makes you feel like you're playing a Game Boy Advance and not a Game Gear. The final boss song is also good. The song called Sonic's Theme, which is a really funky electronic remix of It Doesn't Matter version 2, is also really great. So while the soundtrack is generally not my thing, you gotta admit, those chow no music. Also, this project is how I found as an unused version of Spagonia Night theme in the game's files. Unleashed is coming. If it hasn't been announced by the time this video is released, It will be. Number 60, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine for the Game Gear. This is a pale imitation of the Genesis soundtrack. Most of the songs are done better in that version of the game. That said, there's still some good stuff in it. The ending theme is really great. I dare say there's no particularly bad songs in the game, but it's not particularly impressive either. 59, Sonic Rush Adventure. The only good songs in this game are A New Venture 3 times, the main version, the SRA remix on the soundtrack, which I'm not even sure is in the game, and the theme of Hidden Island. Otherwise, the only tracks that impressed me were Windmill Village mode versions 1 through 5, which are just remixes of the file select from Sonic 3. Every original track was extremely boring at worst and slightly boring at best. This game's got a ridiculous knack for making the DS seem like it's capable of producing CD quality music though. The guitars especially sound pristine. I don't know how they did it. But yeah, this soundtrack's pretty boring. 58, Sonic Forces Speed Battle. This is a majority tracks lifted from other games, some being instrumental versions of vocal tracks, a lot coming in from Sonic Forces, and then an original remix of Planet Wisp for some reason, and a new title theme. This is pretty low solely because I think it's really lazy. This is like buying a greatest hits album from any artist. It's worthless, but it's good stuff. The few original tracks aren't bad, except for the Mephiles ones. Main Menu World Tour version is definitely the best original song in the soundtrack. 57, Sonic the Fighters. So, the first stage is called South Island Lovers, and everyone in the comments is saying, "You fight Knuckles? Is Knuckles a lover? I thought he was tougher than leather, but it turns out he's also tougher than prenuptial agreements." South Island is a pretty good song. Canyon Cruise is a nice little chill vibe, although I'm not sure how great it would be for a fighting game. Thankfully, how well a song fits into a game is not criteria I consider in these rankings. Casino Night's also very good. Very much energetic and fun. Got a caramel dancing vibe that I associate with it because I'm that kind of person who listens to caramel dancing on a regular basis. Sonic vs. Knuckles North Wind is kinda hype. The only other good song in this game is called Sunset Town, and it's unused and therefore doesn't count. No exaggeration, every other song in this game is so boring I actually can't believe it. Most boring stuff's in Sonic CD US. I do not care for Eurobeat. I was gonna write more, but I forgot. 56, Sonic 3D Blast for the Saturn. I'm about to get so much shit from the 3 people who care about this one. I look in the comment section in nearly all of the songs, and it's just endless praise. Everyone loves this damn thing. Everyone's like, "Oh my god, it's like if Sonic CD US and JP soundtracks had a baby." And while that's literally entirely correct, I don't think they realize what damage CD US's soundtrack did to the gene pool. The soundtrack peaks at the title theme, which I will readily admit is a banger. I also will say I like the invincibility in the speed up and game over songs, cause yeah, this game's short jingles are all quite great. But for the stages, after the first one, we proceed to get more and more mediocre songs. Green Grove is okay, I actually like Act 2, but it gets a little repetitive for me. Rusty Ruins is reminiscent of a lesser Sonic R, and the second act is kinda just annoying. Spring Stadium Zone is really just mediocre jazz. Diamond Dust Zone, Act 2, has some merits, but it's not my thing. Then we have Volcano Valley, which are both quite honestly trash. It goes for an intense film soundtrack vibe, and I actually hate it. It's repetitive and has nothing worth listening to. Gene Gadget and Panic Puppet are both inoffensive D&B. As inoffensive as D&B can be to me. Panic Puppet Act 2 has a really neat section. I would dare say I like it. It's the part where it gets calmer and there's a woodwind sample, I think. Instead of festering negativity, I just want to say, listen to the special stage theme. It's funky, jazzy, energetic, and fun. It's perfect for a special stage. It's a quintessential Sonic song. It's something that would only work in a Sonic game. It just screams pre-adventure Sonic and encapsulates everything they were going for at the time. And if vocal tracks are more your thing, You're My Hero does not disappoint. It's a Sonic R song, but for a game that's not Sonic R. And it's really good. It's not amazing, but it was definitely good enough as a closer to make listening to this worthwhile. 55, Triple Trouble. I really expected better from this game. I couldn't get past the train stage, but I knew people loved this game and I knew Robotnik Winter Zone had a banger song. Turns out it's mostly forgettable music. It's all energetic stuff, but most of it lacks any kind of coherent structure. It's all a tad randomly generated and doesn't really hold my interest. A couple songs are really great, Robotnik Winter Zone being one. Both Sunset Park zones are really fantastic, Act 3 probably being my favorite in the game. The final boss theme is pretty cool, and that's about it. There's no standout bad tracks except maybe the Metal Sonic theme. This was mostly inoffensive as a soundtrack, but at the same time, mostly not bad. And I'm just now realizing that's the same thing. 54, Sonic Jump 2012. I clarify 2012 because the original Sonic Cafe game of the same name is one of those classic lost media cases. I can't listen to that soundtrack, and if this is anything to go by, it's probably not too big a loss. What's crazy about this is I cannot in good conscience call anything from it bad, but I also can't call anything from it good. So watch me call 3 songs good in the next sentence. Green Hill Zone Act 1, 2, and 3 are all pretty good. Mountain Zone 2 is fine. Jungle Zone 3 is good. Blue Sky Zone 1 has a nice chord progression right before it loops, and the rest is just okay. Instead of being painfully boring, it's just a regular indifferent boring. Cosmic Zone is pretty fun too, probably my favorite. I'd say the closest this game gets to being bad is when it does its best Sonic Speedball impression for Mechanical Zone stages. 53. Sonic Jump Fever. The sequel to Sonic Jump 2012 has nearly exactly the same issues. Every song is pleasant, but they're all forgettable and substanceless. But again, they're all pleasant. I don't have anything against any of the songs. Jungle Zone is easily the best in the game. It's so fun and catchy. Blue Sky Zone is also better than it was in the original Sonic Jump. Not the 2005 one, the 2012 one. This is the sequel of. But it has a worse rendition of Cosmic Zone. These two soundtracks are pretty even, one's shorter and sweeter, and that's this one. 52. Sonic Gems Collection. Most of the original tracks are pretty boring but inoffensive. The one called Games is definitely my favorite, because it's got a peaceful synth sound that I like. The Manuals and Extras theme is also kinda calming. If you like chill music, I recommend both of them. Otherwise, the real appeal lies in the remix tracks, some of which are good, some of which are funny, and some are great. Some of them are also bad, though. That's what you get when you just take random songs and turn them into a random different genre. The inappropriately titled Sonic 3 Mega D remix is easily my favorite on here, but the Open Your Heart MJZ remix is funny, the Sonic Heroes No GTR mix is also kinda funny and cool in a way, and I also like the Livin' in the City Latin remix. That was fun. My personal favorite original track was called Sonic After 6290 Mix. I know every single title I've just given sounds like a random collection of letters and numbers. No problem if you can't remember all of them. I don't know why they're called what they are. 51. Sonic X Leapster. Yeah, occasional reminder that this list is not a joke. If you look up the Sonic Leapster OST, a majority of the videos have comments like unironic banger and stuff. People are oftentimes embarrassed of being correct. Not me. This game has a banger soundtrack. Compositionally. I absolutely hate the Leapster sound font. It's awful, but to be honest, having grown up with the thing, this is some of the best music I've ever heard the console produce. The thing was incapable of making stuff sound good. Or so I thought until I heard Eggman's Super Sucky Machine. And no, again, I'm not making any of this up. Eggman's bass was also a banger. To be honest, I'm shocked it's not more of a running joke in the Sonic community that Sonic music is so good that even the Leapster has bangers. But I mean, you've seen this list. So really, this game deserves so much credit for having the same audio issues as the Gamecom, but not sounding like utter dog shit like Sonic Jam did. Whoever was responsible for this was actually insane. 50. Sonic Labyrinth. I hate to say it, but this soundtrack is kinda good? Not very good, just kinda good. Many of the songs are nice. You can tell because if you look in the comment section of Deoxys Prime's upload of the bonus stage, literally every comment says the word nice. I'm wondering if every rip on YouTube has messed up the timing or if the game messed up the timing. It's really hard to rip Game Gear music, I'm sure, but like, I don't know if it's messed up on official hardware. But either way, the highlights are Area 1, 3, and 4. The rest are either okay or kinda bad. The final boss theme is really good, but again, I can't listen to it because all the rips suck, and I'm not playing Sonic Labyrinth. There's a couple songs like the ending theme that have really good sections, but they're like 40 seconds to a minute into an otherwise bland song. This is very much a mixed bag, but when I say that, it does mean that there's reasons to reach into the bag. Just don't pick the bad ones. 49. Sega Sonic Popcorn Shop. Out of all the Sega Sonic games, I'm actually surprised that the Popcorn Machine has the best soundtrack. The sound chip made some really pleasant songs. Flavor Select and Popping Corn are really good songs. Conveyor Chase ain't bad either. I guess you could say they popped off. 48. Sonic Mega Collection. Shockingly good stuff. Like, this is the game that is the reason that I'm including Sonic Collections in the first place. This has such an amazingly calming vibe. The Options and Extras menu theme is definitely my favorite, but nearly every original track for this collection is good, except the credits theme. 47. Sonic Mega Collection Plus. Hey, remember when I said the credits theme was bad? Yeah, this is the same as Sonic Mega Collection, but it's got a better credits theme, and it's amazing! Let's go! 46. Shadow the Hedgehog. One of the best songs in the game is The Ark, which, of course, not included on the Spotify soundtrack. Same for Gun Fortress and Final Haunt. I mean, Glyphic Canyon's okay. And I left that comment in the script for 2 hours as I continued listening, receiving nothing of value in return, except Cosmic Fall, which is only okay at best. Sometimes there'd be a song that seemed familiar, so I'd pop into the YouTube upload and look at the title, and bada bing, it's just a reused Sonic Adventure 2 track. And the Sonic Adventure 2 tracks they pick are consistently the ones I don't care about. Probably because they're from the Shadow campaign, and Shadow is consistently associated with lackluster music. This is the most generic possible take on the brand of rock that Sonic encompasses. Nothing is special about the soundtrack, very few tracks stand on their own, and there's some that are so boring they put Sonic CD US to shame. Honestly, this is one of the worst offenders because it's a genre I generally like. There's no genre bias resulting in this low placement. I like what it's trying to be, but I hate what it is. What's funny is that most of my favorite tracks from the game completely strayed from the normal style used for main gameplay. Event Recollection of the Ark is a nice 20-second piano melody that's really sad. Ending Sad Ending is more of the same. Event I Am The Story Is Over is more of the same. Event Professor's Fault is more of the same. Event Feel the Black Power is more of the Event Commander's Memories is almost an entire minute of cool electronic stuff. Event My Perfect Plan is a fun song, but if you paid attention, all of those were event songs, meaning they're cutscene songs, and it really says something when the cutscene music is the highlight of my listening experience. The game's soundtrack is so unbelievably weak, so surely the vocal tracks must carry, right? Well, first up we have I Am at Aldi, which is pretty good. It's Crush 40. It's a little darker and heavier than most. The Final Doom version is potentially my favorite one. I prefer the vocals in it. I also really like the I Am bridge. It's great. The main version's good too, but I so much prefer the Final Doom version, and I'm so disappointed it's not on the official soundtrack on Spotify. But honestly, the differences are really minor, so I mean, Almost Dead is actual trash. It's close to the worst vocal track in the series. If you like lame metal with bad vocals, then it's up your alley. There's at least one good riff, and it's right before and during what I think is the first guitar solo. If the upload I listened to is to be believed, it's so loud that during the riff it causes the limiter to destroy the audio quality, but if not for that riff, I consider it irredeemable. Waking Up is boring, but there's some almost good sections. Eggman Docro Beatnik Mix is somehow worse than the original. It was already the weakest Sonic Adventure 2 vocal track. How did they do this? The Chosen One is slow and kinda overlong, but not bad. I like the guitar and the vocals are good. But with all that said, it officially means that every part of the soundtrack I've had something to bitch about. The best normal gameplay songs in a game aren't even on the official soundtrack. The best overall songs in a game are 20-second long piano cutscene music. Every vocal track has at least one problem, but thankfully, there's two redeeming songs. Never Turn Back is thankfully a really fun Phineas and Ferb sounding song. Yeah, Phineas and Ferb, yeah. And then Magnafie's All Hail Shadow comes into play. Sonic Team tried to push Magnafie under the rug by commissioning Crush 40 to do a really lackluster cover of it for Sonic 06 that's worse in most regards. Nate Wants to Battle independently covered it, and despite doing a pretty good job, didn't meet Magnafie's glory. Magnafie is really funny, because they dropped one of the most underrated post-grunge albums ever, released All Hail Shadow, one more album including Who I Am, which is a banger and was damn close to being in this game, but Sega was afraid of having two good songs in Shadow the Hedgehog, and then they dropped off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. All Hail Shadow is fucking brilliantly catchy, and heavy, and has a fantastic guitar solo. It perfectly encapsulates what I think the story of this game is, too. I love All Hail Shadow so much. I'm so completely unashamed to sing its praises, and I hope I'm not the only one to know that it's the best Shadow song, as a character. Not even just vocal songs about him, not even just from this game. It's the best song that's ever been associated with him as a character in any capacity. It's a shame that it's exclusive to this soundtrack. Number 45, Sonic Advance 2. I know what you're thinking. Stop, you're killing me. If you speak any further, I'm literally going to implode. Your opinions are so bad. But you are foolish. Anger and vitriol fuels viewer retention, I think. You're waiting to see how I justify this bad placement. I don't really care for the soundtrack much. Most of it's very much not my thing. There's a couple good tracks like Sky Canyon Act 2, which is my favorite song in the game. Sky Canyon in particular is really funny because the second I heard Act 1, I was like, shouldn't this be more energetic? And then that's exactly what Act 2 was. It's almost as if Act 1 only exists to lead into the glory of Act 2. I also really like Music Plant, both acts. They're both unique and fun sounding. My favorite songs for the game were Demo 1 and Demo 2. You know, the songs that nobody should care about. Went hard. Same for Zone Select 2, and extra Demo 1 and 2. And the Options theme, and Versus 2, which isn't something I can even find on YouTube. God forbid anything other than what you'd hear in normal gameplay, except the Special Stage theme, which is pretty okay. The rest of the soundtrack ranges from boring to Sonic Riders. Techno Bass tried to destroy the metal, but it failed as it was struck to the ground. And then Egg Utopia has the same song twice with no changes. Imagine being Egg Utopia. This is a significant downgrade from Advance 1. You'll see how significant of a downgrade when you see where I put Advance 1. Sonic Riders for the Game Boy sounding ass. 44, Sonic Advance 3. This is very much an improved take on Sonic Advance 2. They nearly perfected the GBA's sound font by this point, to the point where it's no longer even close to a detriment to the game's music. Route 99's a pretty fun opening stage, all three acts are quite decent. Sunset Hill Act 1 is a nice take on Green Hill. Toy Kingdom has a nice section in the first two acts that becomes the forefront in Act 3, but its take on the melody's the most boring one. Twinkle Snow Act 1 and Chaos Angel Act 1 are where it's at, bringing the grand total of Act 2 and Act 3 tracks that hold a candle to their Act 1 counterparts to a solid 0. Or 1 if Chaos Angel Act 3 grows on me, but I'm not gonna let that happen. Outside of the stage themes, we have a pretty good Eggman theme, whatever EX Boss is, and EX Demo number 2, which is the best song in the game, for no reason. The rest is kinda boring, very Sonic sounding, and if you've heard as much Sonic music as I have during this video's production, you'll get how that doesn't impress me much. 43, Sonic 2 for the Game Gear. I wasn't really feeling this one, but it isn't bad. That all changed when I heard the bad ending theme, which is easily the best song in the game. Better than the good ending theme, which is quite funny. The good ending theme is also really good though, so don't sleep on it. The soundtrack's generally pretty good, nothing stands out though. I like Sky High Zone, it's a nice chill vibe, very relaxing. Aqua Lake is fun, but again the ending themes are where it's at. It's kind of a shame that the end of the hardest Sonic game of all time is the best part of it. Gimmick Mountain and Scrambled Egg Zone are kinda whatever. Also not a fan of Underground Zone, both the stage and the song. The worst first level in Sonic history if Sonic Blast didn't exist, but really the worst song in the game has to be the boss theme, really kinda ear-grating. 42, Sonic Rush. 2 years ago, I got ratioed on Twitter for saying this game had one of the worst soundtracks in the series. Now I'm on the side of the mob. This is clearly not one of the worst soundtracks. I'm not a fan of Hideki Naganuma's composition style. I didn't like the Jet Set Radio soundtrack, and I don't like a lot of this, but I do know gold when I hear it. I still generally hate the style, don't get me wrong, but I cannot in good conscience ignore the ones that transcended my bias. I always really like What You Need, it's a really funky groove, and is way too hyped to be a character select theme. And in terms of level themes, Villanova, Wrapped in Black, and A New Day are 3 bangers in a row. Putting those 3 back to back got me really excited that the rest of the soundtrack would be good. It's not really. I don't really care for any of the rest, including Back to Back, which is like supposed to be the vocal track for the game, I guess? Don't get me wrong, Hideki Naganuma's wild for making these sound completely uncompressed on the DS. These are like really well mixed songs and could pass as just regular music. The compression seems almost intentional rather than a hardware limitation. It's really impressive stuff, but I just don't like the style. It's not my thing at all. 41, Sonic 2 for the Master System. There's virtually no differences between this and the Game Gear one, just that one boss song that's different. I prefer the boss theme for the Master System version. But one more song was all it took to put above Sonic Rush. I'm crazy, I know. 40, Sonic 4 Episode 2. As is probably evident, since it hasn't been mentioned yet, this is a straight downgrade from Sonic 4 Episode 1. In this department only. I haven't played Sonic 4. Everything I know about Episode 2 is that it's an improvement, but it does not have a better soundtrack. Each song feels randomly generated, and the snare they use gets really obnoxious after a while because every song is fast and upbeat and uses the same snare. It all blends together and it's really samey with only 2 standout tracks. But holy crap, Lois, they are absolutely standout tracks. Sky Fortress Act 2 and 3. 2 being the better one is easily one of my top 20, if not top 10 Sonic songs of all time. It's so good for literally no reason. If it was in a more beloved Sonic game, it'd be one of the most popular songs in the series, but unfortunately, me and many others were scared of playing the game, so they avoided hearing this banger song. 39, Sonic 4 Episode Metal. I'll be honest, I can't even figure out what this game's soundtrack is. As far as I can tell, it's just a shortened version of the Sonic 4 Episode 1 soundtrack. I'm putting this here, but not with any confidence. Nobody on the internet can tell me what this is, and the encyclopedia doesn't make mention of its music. 38, Sonic 06. The soundtrack is painfully boring outside of Dreams of an Absolution, which is an embarrassing electronic rock song, and the Rabid Luigi theme song. There's like 2 good level themes, Wave Ocean the Inlet, Soliana New City, and Flame Core the Cavern, and Solaris Phase 2. And Elise's theme. But you notice that 2 of those were just remixes of His World, a song of which has been covered for Snapcube's Sonic 06 dub and done better there and by Nate Wants to Battle. The particular version of His World included with this game is pretty much the worst version of the song I know of. Even the E3 2006 version is somehow better. Oh, and Elise's theme. Also somehow done better by Snapcube with their brilliant Die Young mashup. I said it at the start, but I must repeat to make it obvious. This soundtrack is boring. A majority of the best songs in the games are slow ones that I would never listen to outside of this project, but I can appreciate because they're good compositions. There's no sense of fun or excitement in this soundtrack. A majority of it is devoid of those things, to the point where it hardly feels like Sonic. I know a lot of people will stand by the soundtrack being the best part of an otherwise bad game, but no, it's not good. It's an overly serious and depressing take on Sonic, and while I can respect quite a few things in here, it's really sad to see the tone shift in this way. But what's sadder is I can't actually put it any lower, because as much as I hate a majority of the soundtrack, there's enough good songs in here that if you pick and choose just the good stuff, there's more than enough to work with to make this one worthwhile. 37, Sonic Unleashed. This is really not my thing, but for once, I can respect it. This is a very respectable soundtrack, in a similar way that Mario Odyssey's soundtrack is. It's not the best on its own, being much better when paired with the game, but even on its own, this is such a diverse listening experience. A majority of the soundtrack has a very cinematic feel to it, which is generally a vibe I don't really appreciate, but because of how many different genres are represented, and quite well at that, it ends up being pretty good as a whole. There's a lot of really unique moments on here, like Dear My Friend vocals by Brent Cash, which is a really cool piano ballad. Spagonia's main theme is a really great French-sounding song, very catchy and fun stuff. Rooftop Run is potentially the most Sonic-sounding song in the game, and it's very good and fun. Orchestral rock is an underrated genre, and only Sonic really attempts it. It's probably my favorite song in the game, surprise surprise. Windmill Isle is very similar. Apotos is one of the cooler ones because of the flute line being intrinsically fun and catchy. Tornado Defense First Battle was another fun one. Supersonic vs. Perfect Gaia is a really great orchestral remix of Endless Possibility, which for some reason isn't included on the soundtrack. Endless Possibility has to be Johnny Test's best vocal performance of all time. He just killed it. Great work, Johnny Test. Despite being in the era of completely lifeless Sonic music, this one manages to stand out by being a world adventure that actually lives up to its Japanese namesake, and by having some fun tracks it can sometimes remind you that it is indeed a Sonic game. 36. Sonic Lost World. I have next to nothing to say about this. It's some fun stuff. Wonder World is a nice track. So glad it got reused 4 times. Windy Hill has some bops too. I like Frozen Factory and the other ice tracks. And The Winter is a fun track for something that doesn't actually appear in game. That's a joke. It might. I don't know. Sea Bottom Segway is overlong on the soundtrack, but it's nice for what it is. The rest isn't too bad. Kind of just background music. It's generic for Sonic. Not really all that impressive, but certainly not bad. 35. Sonic and the Secret Rings. My expectations for this soundtrack were in the negatives. I thought I'd hate it, but I didn't really. Don't get me wrong, by trying to be atmospheric to the setting, there are many songs in this game that I'm just intrinsically not gonna vibe with. I'm not a fan of this style of music, but there are quite a few songs that are the standard Sonic rock affair that I actually like quite a bit. The Palace Was Found, High and Broken, Unawakening Float, and It Has Come to This were the 4 songs that were pretty okay. Not crazy good or anything, but definitely good stuff. They sound a bit like Linkin Park to me, which is unexpected, to say the least, in this kind of game. The 2 highlights of the soundtrack were definitely the 2 main vocal tracks. I clarify main because there's a lot of vocal tracks in this. Anyways, Make the Least Read Porn is a good main theme for the game. I've always really liked it. It's very catchy. And I like when the lyrics say, Make the lead be born. Meanwhile, the credits, Worth a Chance, is really emotional and would probably impact me if I played the game. That's really all I have to say about this. Generally not my thing, but there's some good stuff, so I respect it. The game still sucks though. 34. Sonic and the Black Knight. This is very boring. Very few tracks stand out. I'm not too into the orchestral style it's going for. I'm not a classical fan, and this kind of feels like that. I also got jump scared by a reused track from Sonic Adventure 2. It reflects badly on you when you reuse tracks directly without even remixing them. Deep Woods, Crystal Cave, Molten Mine, and Dragon's Lair are pretty good standard gameplay songs. Not many of the cutscene songs were very impressive to me, but credit where credit's due. Merlina, the Queen of the Underworld, is a really beautiful song for the first minute and a half. The game's strong because of the vocal tracks, though. Crush 40 delivers not 1, not 2, but some amount more than 2 vocal tracks, and they're pretty good. Not much to say about any of them particularly, except the main theme of the game, Night of the Wind. I prefer the Nate Wants to Battle version, but the Crush 40 take has some really great bass, and it's a really great song no matter which version you're listening to. It's one of the best in the series. Live Life is a pretty nice hair metal ballad. With Me, one of the best non-Crush 40 vocal tracks, is in fact really good. It's fun and upbeat and has very nice vocals. The soundtrack's kinda bloated with cutscene music, but it has some good vocal tracks, so it's about neck and neck with Secret Rings. I'd say it's ahead very marginally, and only by virtue of having a little more songs. 33. Sonic Drift. Well, this was a pleasant surprise. Most of the tracks aren't crazy or anything, but a good majority of these tracks are decent, and some are really good. I especially like Labyrinth and Green Hill Course. They're both really fun tracks, music-wise. Not the race tracks, I never played the game. Otherwise, I'm a fan of the options music and the invincibility theme. This is a short but mostly sweet romp. Also, shout out to this game for being the only Sonic music comment section in existence where people in the comments say it's bad. Really makes me fear for my life because of this high placement. 32. Sonic Dash 2 Sonic Boom. So I can only find 3 songs on YouTube from this game. They're all absolutely amazing, but it's 3 songs. How do I rank this? But for real, the character select theme is absolutely amazing. I can't recommend it enough. Almost makes you forgive the mainline Sonic Boom games for being dreadful. 31. Sonic Generations 3DS. Hey guys, are you ready for another bad opinion? great! Despite the 3DS port being easily the best version of the game, the soundtrack's slightly worse. Only slightly, though. It's missing some of my favorite original tracks that came from the console port, and it features a different track list. Casino Night and Emerald Hill were positive track changes, while Radical Highway and Water Palace were just garbage tracks. I also think this game was full of missed potential by not featuring more Game Gear songs. Imagine a timeline where instead of Casino Night and Mushroom Hill, we got Aqua Planet Zone and Sunset Park Zone. Imagine instead of Sonic Adventure, we got Sonic Advance. If they were going to go with the handheld Sonic history route, they should have gone all out with it. Sonic has had some banger handheld songs and that are completely ignored. That would have also justified the inclusion of a Sonic Rush song that was not one of the good ones. The boss songs included here were good though. Big Arm, Bio Lizard, and Egg Emperor are all really cool tracks. 30. Sonic Generations. The console port of Sonic Generations, despite being a worse game than the 3DS version, I'm standing by that, has a slightly better soundtrack by virtue of having more original songs. White Space Medley, in particular, which is the medley track that encompasses all of the overworld songs in the game, is absolutely brilliant. It perfectly combines every song in the game into one coherent and honestly quite spectacular piece that really encapsulates the glory of this series' history. The take on Planet Wisp in particular is really good. I like the Colors version a shit ton, don't get me wrong, but this was the first time I'd heard it, and I kinda just sat in front of the stage listening to its music because it was so good. I'll never forget that. Some of the missions are really cool, but that's all the original tracks. This game is like a greatest hits collection, and despite picking some really good songs from throughout the series, oftentimes there are worse versions than the actual songs. This game has no identity of its own because it's entirely listed from past entries, so I see very little value in the soundtrack as a whole, but don't get me wrong, it's really good stuff. 29. Sonic Frontiers. Sonic Frontiers is an absolutely brilliant game. It's so good, everything about it kicks ass. And yet the soundtrack doesn't do much for me. It's really just like the worst parts of every other popular Sonic game I've ranked low, like Sonic Unleashed and Sonic CD US and stuff, but also it's like a lesser imitation of Sonic Forces sometimes, which is really weird, because how do you become a lesser imitation of Sonic Forces? And why does that game continue to get the flack when this game did it worse? I know why. It's because the game is so good that people were blinded from this game's mid-soundtrack. I do want to clarify what I mean when I call the soundtrack mid, though. I once again am referring to it on its own merits detached from the game itself. Say what you will about the open world style of music that Breath of the Wild popularized, but I find it both brilliant for environmental storytelling in the context of the game, and absolutely dreadful for a soundtrack on its own. Every overworld song is this long drawn-out 6-minute piano thing that never goes anywhere and either bores you or annoys you to death by the end of its overlong runtime. In the game it doesn't matter because you need minimalist music to not get grating after your 4th and 5th hour in the same open zones, but as a soundtrack, they all end up feeling like padding for an already bloated 6-hour slog of a soundtrack. The cutscene music doesn't help. Nearly none of them are particularly interesting, and the ones that are, well, I just want to say that Cutscene Heart and Soul is one of my favorite songs in the game. But every time it comes on, I burst into a fit of laughter because it's so completely incapable of portraying the emotions it's aiming for. It's not emotional because the vocals are so childlike and innocent to the point where they sound happy and fun. But the chord progression and the melody itself are supposed to be emotional. It would have been if they didn't make it a vocal song. If they just used any other instrument, it would have worked, but as it stands, I find it hilarious. But speaking of vocals, those are basically the standout tracks. There's definitely a few good level and mission tunes, most of the highlights coming from the 4th zone cyberspace levels, but the boss themes are mostly where it's at. But honestly, they're not much for me in comparison to other vocal tracks from the series. These are relatively okay, a lot of them seem like they're trying to be more edgy than Infinite or Shadow the Hedgehog songs. I sometimes ponder the alternate reality where the fan outcry for Weezer to make a main vocal theme resulted in a Weezer credits theme for Sonic Frontiers. Instead, we got Nate Wants to Battle, which is conceptually really, really cool. Sonic Team bringing on fans to work on the games themselves is one of the coolest things of all time. But yeah, Nate Wants to Battle, despite having a solid performance, was stuck with the least interesting of all of the vocal songs, which is still really good, don't get me wrong, but this series has left me with an unrealistically high standard. I like a lot of what this game is going for, but for the purposes of this ranking, it's hard to place a 6-hour collection of mostly classical-esque music higher with the amount of genre bias I have against it. 28. Sonic Colors DS. This is the same as Sonic Colors but more compressed. It's got some good stuff, but the real shit is mostly in that game. Most of the original tracks are basically original arrangements of stuff from the console version. Anything with mission at the start of the title is new, and let me tell ya, a lot of those very tracks are super good. A lot of the boss themes is the same way. Many of the boss and mission themes are some of the best in the soundtrack. It's the Wii conversions that bring it down. I don't really have much to say about the soundtrack as a whole, so I'll try to better explain myself when I get to Colors Wii, because 27. Sonic Colors. This is the same as Sonic Colors DS, but uncompressed, and slightly better, I guess. A lot of this game's soundtrack doesn't appeal to me if I'm completely honest, but what this does have is the Gameland tracks, which are really cute pseudo-chiptune renditions of the main stage themes. Sometimes they're the best versions of their respective songs, and when they're not, it's because Planet Wisp. While I wouldn't consider Planet Wisp my favorite song in the series, it's damn close to it. And anyone who said that it's the best, I would agree with them without hesitation. Planet Wisp is actually so beautiful that it's insane. Act 1 is my favorite. It brilliantly combines piano and orchestra behind one amazing bass line, which makes it sound distinctly Sonic. The piano and orchestra segments could be used to make the world's greatest classical song, single-handedly trouncing the careers of Beethoven and Bach, but instead they go one step further and remind you that, yeah, this is Sonic, it's too cool to be content with being the best in your respective genre. It's gotta go further beyond. I'm less a fan of Act 2 and 3, but they're still great tracks and very distinct and fun, and being worse than Peak is, to be expected. Meanwhile, the map theme is a separate beast entirely and is incredibly pretty. The entirety of Planet Wisp is the soundtrack at its best. Otherwise, Starlight Carnival Act 1 and Aquarium Park are my highlights. They're very fun. Otherwise, I'm not too into the electronic vibe this soundtrack has. 4 on the Floor gets tiring for a soundtrack this long. The soundtrack isn't consistently amazing, but it has enough bangers sprinkled in that I love it a lot. Reach for the Stars, this game's vocal track, is one of those bangers. Reach for the Stars is a perfect song for a game like this, and it feels like everything Sonic should have been in the 2010s. Because of the change in tone and direction for the series becoming more kid-oriented after the mid-2000s made Sonic a laughingstock among adult audiences, they needed a song that wasn't as intense as Crush 40 typically was, but they still needed something that felt like Sonic. So some brilliant guy heard Fireflies by Owl City and was like, yo, what if we did Owl City, but made it twice as fast? And out of that brain blast came Reach for the Stars, a song that's initially really silly and stupid, but so was Sonic Colors. This is a song that was just extremely fun and catchy, and by virtue of its speed and optimistic energy, it still sounded like Sonic. It's one of my favorite vocal tracks, and is always what my mind associates with this game after Planet Wisp. Speak With Your Heart, however, is a funny little thing. I think it was done infinitely better in the Sonic Symphony, but the version from this game is indeed kinda a banger. Some may be off-put by the vocal effect, but I listen to 100 gecs, so I'm immune. And also I really like how it represents Tails trying to translate Yacker, which is why it gets less robotic as the song progresses. It's no Want You Gone from Portal 2, but it's very fun and very catchy. 26, Sonic Colors Ultimate. Yeah, this one's placed higher than the Wii version because in a new update, the entire Wii soundtrack is included. I know full well that the newer remixes included with Sonic Colors Ultimate are typically worse than the Wii version in every way. If I was ranking launch Sonic Colors Ultimate, it'd be lower than DS easily, but since I'm ranking the entire soundtrack, that includes all of Wii, and including all of Wii and bonus tracks of questionable quality is better, or as my friend put it, the reason I'm putting Colors Ultimate above Colors in this ranking is because I believe more music is always better in a soundtrack when you already have great music. So if somebody played to me the best composition in existence and then followed it by a monkey raking an electric guitar with his own shit, then I would have to think that that is better as a piece of work than just the best composition in existence alone. While I stand by my placement here, I get the argument behind this hypothetical. Take Ratitude Deluxe for example. Ratitude, Weezer's best album, is the best because of how consistent it is from front to back. By adding the 4 deluxe tracks, you've officially added 3 pieces of dog shit to an otherwise solid experience. This would be a downgrade, no? In a sense, yeah, of course it is. You're taking away the consistency of the album's quality by padding out its length with filler. But you see, this isn't a traditional album. This is a soundtrack. This isn't one of those things that's meant to be enjoyed as a complete experience. Nobody views a game's soundtrack as a coherent and complete experience. A game's soundtrack oftentimes includes cutscene music, which are often literally worthless when detached from the game as a whole. You're not going to listen to just the cutscene music without watching the cutscene, are you? Sometimes the game's soundtrack may include a 6 or 7 minute audio file of every sound effect in the game. That's not going to affect the consistency of a soundtrack, it's just sound effects. Why is it even included? Sometimes in these soundtracks you got like a minute-long song of literal noise channel. Take Mega Man 1's soundtrack. Are you really gonna say, yeah, it could have been a perfect experience, but you included Dr. Wily UFO sound effects, so it's not a perfect, coherent experience anymore? Or are you gonna take the 10 or so songs that you like and just ignore the rest? Outside of the classic games, these games have upwards of hundreds of tracks in them. Nearly never are they all going to be golden. You have to sit through so much cutscene music, environmental and ambient tracks that are worthless outside of the context of the game, and sometimes literally just sound effects, that it's impossible to rank any of these based off their coherence and consistency. Plus, this inherently puts longer soundtracks at a disadvantage in terms of consistency because by virtue of having more songs, there are more opportunities for them to be misses. Thus, a more important metric for determining the quality of a soundtrack is the quality of individual songs themselves and how many there are. Even if the deluxe editions are terrible, you still have access to all of the Wii songs if you want, and if you prefer any of the newer renditions, they're positive additions to the soundtrack as a whole. Anything else you're allowed to ignore because this isn't a piece of artwork that's meant to be enjoyed as a whole. It's either meant to be enjoyed in the context of the game or by itself in parts. You can give and take any part of the experience away as you see fit. I do try to take consistency into account when ranking these. After all, if I was just counting the good tracks from each soundtrack, I'd have Sonic Battle much higher. If 90% of the soundtrack is garbage and that 10% is the dark side of the moon, it's gonna be worse than a soundtrack that's 30% garbage and 70% okay at best. I'm taking into account consistency, but at the end of the day, nobody's gonna listen to a majority of these in full. Sonic Frontiers is like 6 hours. If I was ranking these as their quality as experiences to sit down and enjoy in full, Sonic Frontiers would be at the very bottom, because I'd rather listen to Sonic Jam for the Gamecom for 11 minutes than listen to a 6-hour album once. Oh, and then there's this last thing. Some of the remixes are cool. The recolor of Reach for the Stars, while inferior in every way to the original, is pretty cool. Most of the other ones aren't bad either, they're kinda just equal or slightly worse. Planet Wisp Act 2 and 3 remixes alone justify this existing. So, why did I dedicate an entire entry to arguing with a friend on a public platform? Well, think of it as an intermission. Might as well give an explanation to my thought process behind ranking everything. I do try to take into account how the game is as a whole, but generally one banger and a lot of trash will be ranked higher than a soundtrack of entirely mediocre songs. 25. Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine for the Genesis. This is pretty funky. I'm glad that not too many songs were lifted straight from Puyo Puyo. Is a sentence I wrote without having any idea which songs were lifted straight from Puyo Puyo. Configuration is funky, password screen is really great for no reason, the ending theme is a cool Puyo Puyo reference. I prefer Tetris, but I have a lot of respect for every Puyo Puyo fan for being 10 times smarter than the rest of the world. It's the hardest puzzle game for real. Exercise mode is really upbeat and is almost a good enough song to get me to practice Puyo Puyo, but not quite that good. The staff roll is beautiful, and the 2-player multiplayer stage is actually metal as hell. Reminds me of Master of Puppets. It's the best on the soundtrack for sure, but all the ones I mentioned are great. The problem is that the main themes for the actual story mode are bad in comparison. Don't know why the first 4 stages have one song, and then 5 to 8 have the same song but slightly faster, and then 9 to 12 have a new song, and then just 13 has a new song? Like, if you're gonna make 3 songs, why use the same one for 8 stages, then have 1 for 3 and 1 for 1? That makes no sense. 24. Sonic Chaos for the Master System. This is a really solid soundtrack with some really great songs and a lot of really okay ones. My favorites have to be Mecha Green Hill Zone, Gigaopolis Zone, and the Electric Egg Zone, Act 3. All 3 of them are certified bangers. I also really like the file select theme. I have very little to criticize here. This is a really solid soundtrack that'll keep you entertained throughout the whole adventure. The ending themes were the only ones that were particularly lacking. 23. Sonic Blast. It's with a heavy heart that I announce that Sonic Blast has a good soundtrack. I almost refused to believe this. I heard the character select and was like, hey, wait a minute, this is pretty nice. But surely it falls off, right? No, it didn't. Green Hill Zone was great, and actually didn't just reuse the original song for once, not even a remix. Yellow Desert was a fun romp, Red Volcano was a nice little vibe, and then Blue Marine Zone was so good I dropped everything I was doing. I launched this up higher than I ever expected, and then the game hit me with Silver Castle, and there was no turning back. I'm not even remotely embarrassed to call this one of the better soundtracks in the series. I'm baffled and appalled that such a horrible game has this great of a soundtrack, but the best diamonds are found in the roughest of roughs, and this soundtrack is a diamond. And then the final boss song hit. I don't get how it's possible. I feel like I should be held at gunpoint to say anything positive about this game, but here I am, just willingly. Nobody's forcing my hand. None of this list is a joke. It's not an elaborate prank. I assure you that this list was not randomly generated. I genuinely believe this deserves a spot, if not higher. 22. Sonic 3D Blast for the Genesis. This was a pleasant surprise. A majority of this game's soundtrack is really good. Green Grove is better here than it is in Sonic Adventure. Spring Stadium is a really fun Phineas and Ferb sounding song, and Rusty Ruin is super great. Panic Puppet Zone Act 1 and 2 are probably the best 2 songs in the game. The Act 2s for each song are damn near identical to their Act 1 counterparts, but Panic Puppet makes a good job at differentiating them. And then that special stage hit. That song is so goddamn good. I wish I knew. A lot of this game's soundtrack was used in Sonic Adventure 1, but they were usually done better here. Something about the Genesis sound chip suits these songs really well. Not every song is great, and a lot of it ends up feeling like background music, Gene Gadget Zone probably being the most boring one, but the rest of it, banger stuff. 21. Sonic and Knuckles. Hear me out, but be prepared to hear stuff you won't like. This is mostly as low as it is because it's separate from Sonic 3. Together, they'd be much higher, but separately they're both kinda weak, and this is easily the weaker half. Its best tracks were done better in Sonic Mania, and its worst tracks are genuinely just not very good. Sandopolis, for example, incredibly boring. Both acts are bad. Mushroom Hill, despite having a great Act 1 theme, has a lackluster Act 2 theme that seems compositionally lazy to me. But I can't knock greatness when it reveals itself. Flying Battery and Lava Reef, though remixed in Mania, were absolutely on fire here. Specifically Lava Reef Act 1. That zone aged like fine wine. I prefer this version to the one in Mania. Death Egg Zone is fittingly intense, but then Act 2 is literally the same song with almost no changes. Why? I'm not saying this is a bad soundtrack by any means, but as a standalone, it's easily one of the weaker 16-bit efforts. 20. Sonic CD JP. Controversial opinion, but I'm not really the biggest Sonic CD fan. I used to hate both versions, but now I no longer have bad opinions all of the time. Instead, I have bad opinions sometimes. Most levels in this game have at least one good version, but that's actually a main issue of this game. This game has 4 versions of each stage's theme, and most stage themes have the problem of some versions being good and some being bad. Palm Tree Panic, for example, has a banger past and the rest aren't as good, but also the piano solo from Good Future Mix is great, but the rest is worse, and the present version is the bad future version is just bad, and you just have to have these dilemmas back and forth every single time, because you can't just have one song that's consistently good. You have 4 that have bits and pieces that are good, and you have to pick and choose which ones are your favorite. It makes listening to the soundtrack as music significantly more difficult. In terms of sheer quantity, the soundtrack just has an absurd amount of songs, but none of them really hit the highs of later entries. The weaker parts of the soundtrack are just downright boring. Wacky Workbench is straight up one of the worst levels in the series, and its accompanying nothing burger of a song does not help that. In general, the soundtrack mostly occupies a genre that I personally don't care for. I don't care for house, and a majority of the songs don't have any appeal to me because of it. The D&B songs are surefire bad in my opinion, and that's my most hated genre. The game's vocal tracks are fine, Sonic Boom being great and Toot Toot Sonic Warrior being kinda trash. Neither of them hold a candle to later vocal tracks. If you want my full in-depth thoughts though, the songs on screen are great. Palm Tree Panic present, Collision Chaos present, Title Tempest, Good Future, Stardust Speedway, Good Future are the good ones, but not great in my opinion. 19. Sonic Pocket Adventure. Well, this is interesting. Unlike a majority of the soundtracks that are mostly collections of previously released songs, this one's actually kind of worth something. If you're a fan of chiptune, which I am, then this has some unique chiptune remixes of good songs from throughout the series. There's still some original songs here, and they're generally pretty good, but there's very few of them. Gigantic Angel Zone Act 1 gotta be my favorite remix, and Continue's gotta be my favorite original track. Some songs are worse than their originals, some are better, some are on par. It's what you'd expect from a chiptune compilation of Sonic songs. I like it a lot, personally. 19. Sonic 4, Episode 1. Haha. Hey again, it's one of my hot takes. Having never played this game before, hearing nothing but negative things about it for so long, this was a pleasant surprise. It's really, by all accounts, a modern take on classic Sonic soundtracks. Many songs were reminiscent of past songs, but only a select few felt derivative. I really liked all of Splash Hill, and there were a few acts that had some really good tracks as well. The end credits medley really nicely tied the better tracks together. This was overall a really fun time. I'd recommend this to anyone who, like me, ignored this game like the plague because it's Sonic 4. 18. Sonic 4 Episode 1 Mobile. It's the same as last time, but Casino Street Act 2 has a distinct and superior song in the mobile port, if Spotify is to be believed. I sure hope no die-hard Sonic 4 fans with encyclopedic knowledge of the franchise correct me in the comments. 17. Sonic Chaos Game Gear. This is higher than the Master System counterpart, not only because of Gigapolis and Turquoise Hill being better than this version, but also because it contains my literal favorite Sonic song of all time, no question, no competition, full stop. Aqua Planet Zone Game Gear is genre-defining. I'm not even a swing guy, it's not my primary genre, and yet this manages to be a contender for one of my favorite individual songs from any video game. I've been in love with it for close to a decade at this point. I can't sing its praises enough. How they managed to achieve such a rich, full-sounding percussion part with such a brilliant bass line and amazing backing instruments out of the Game Gear sound font? This is a technical and compositional marvel, and no other Sonic game has ever come close to making something as perfect of an individual song as this. It's insane. The rest of the soundtrack is exactly everything I liked about the Master System, but done better on most accounts. When selecting either Sonic Chaos Master System or Game Gear to play, you must select between, do I want a fun game with a good screen, or do I want to listen to music while playing the worst experience known to man? It's a tough choice you must make. Sonic Chaos is a great game. Just please play the Master System version if you can listen to the Game Gear soundtrack as well. That's my recommendation. Find a way. 16. Sonic 1 Genesis. What's there to say about this soundtrack that hasn't been said a million times already? It's absolutely iconic. From the brilliant chord progression and melodies in Green Hill, to the funkalicious Spring Yard, nearly every single song on here stood the test of time. You cannot deny this soundtrack, even if it's become so ubiquitous with the series that none of the songs stand out anymore. You've heard every song on here over a million times, for a good reason. The best songs on here are definitely Green Hill and Spring Yard, with Starlight and Labyrinth being sleeper bangers also. Labyrinth is almost a good enough song to excuse Act 3 from being a level. No, I don't actually mean that. Fuck Act 3. Also, shout out to the special stage music. I really love it. It has an indescribable, transcendent, and psychedelic vibe. It probably sucks to most people, but I'm a really big fan of it. Scrap Brain Zone is probably the worst main stage song. Otherwise, title screen leitmotif, while good, gets stale after a while, and the ending theme should have been its own thing instead of being a medley with little to no changes to any songs, especially because that decision plagued the rest of the classic Sonic games. But shout out to the first 30 seconds. Those are really my only complaints. Sonic 1's soundtrack is probably a good 50% of the reason why the series caught on. I personally think it's the best Genesis game, gameplay-wise, but nobody agrees with me on that, so 15, Team Sonic Racing. You know how Mario Kart 8 has these beautiful jazz arrangements of classic Mario songs, but also a lot of original tracks? Yeah, this is kinda like that. This game heavily relies on remixing classic songs from throughout the series. Sometimes the remixes are damn near identical to the source material, as was the case for some of the Sonic Heroes ones, and sometimes they're completely different, like the Sonic 3D Blast ones. It's a really fun collection of songs from throughout the series' history, and somehow it takes all the radically different styles and meshes them together really well. The original tracks in this game for the main course are really good most of the time. Doctor's Mine and Bingo Party were absolute highlights. Incredibly fun and energetic racing tunes. Nearly every main track in the game is at least good. There's no songs in this game that I can point to as weak spots, because even the weakest ones are kinda just background music to me. They're still energetic and are often really upbeat. They work perfectly for a racing game, where music isn't really the forefront so much as the speed and energy they have. On its own, this tends to bring it down because it ends up sounding really samey by the end of the 3-hour soundtrack. There's so many goddamn songs in this game that there's absolutely something for everyone in here somewhere. Question is whether or not you want to go through the digging to find it. But I'd say there's so much fun stuff in here, from the Hyper Potions tracks that have those classic Hyper Potions gimmicks, to the collaborations with other Sonic composers that bring all their unique styles to a very coherent collection of music. One of the weaker aspects of the game is the vocal track, Green Light Ride. I feel really bad for the singer of Crush 40, because his voice sounds so genuinely pained in this song, and it's really weak. It's almost as if he's been straining his voice for his whole career, and this is the song that finally caught up to him. The instrumentals are kinda generic hair metal too, but the melodies, when remixed, are often pretty good. The soundtrack includes like 6 variants of the song, my favorite being the racing mix, the Tyler Smith remix, and the Gemists? Yeah, the Gemist score just look at it. It's on screen. But if you don't like the song to begin with, there is a lot of it, and it's definitely one of the more hateable vocal tracks in the series. I'd say don't sleep on this soundtrack. There's some really good stuff in it if you put the time to find it. And personally, I think having so many songs ends up helping it in the long run, because by the end, you wonder how there was ever 100 songs and none of them were particularly bad. 14. Sonic 3. As blasphemous as this placement may seem, I remind you that this is just Sonic 3, and not 3 and K. Alright, let's go. This is a really great soundtrack with some of the best in the series, but it's not perfect front to back. Marble Garden is mid, Angel Island is comparatively weak opening stage for a Genesis song, Carnival Night is, dare I say, annoying? Also not a particularly big fan of the launch bass zone. None of these are necessarily bad, just not my thing. But when I said best songs in a series, I was not exaggerating. Ice Cap Zone, both acts 1 and 2, were some of the best goddamn songs in the series. Plagiarism aside, they're some of the catchiest things in video game history, and I will stand by them till the end of time. The final boss theme is one of the most metal things to have ever come out of a soundtrack. The bonus stages are pretty good too, but the Blue Sphere song is where it's really at. I also gotta give credit to the genre variety present. While Sonic 1 and 2 were tonally consistent, this one shakes things up by having hints of rock, funk, whatever Carnival Night is, and then we have File Select. Easily my favorite song in the soundtrack. Hot take saying the File Select is my favorite, but it is. You're the wrong one around here. The competition mode songs are mostly pretty good. My favorite's gotta be Desert Palace because I refuse to have a popular opinion, but Endless Mine is also great. This is a short but sweet romp with some genuine bangers, but mostly does not stand on its own. It needs the other half of its soundtrack to fully shine. 13. Sonic Adventure. This one is series defining. The impact of this game's soundtrack fundamentally changed the franchise. From the second you hear the opening riff of Open Your Heart in the introduction, or the title screen if you're funny, you know that this isn't the same Sonic as before. Rock has made its official debut in the series, and it's here to stay. Vocal tracks aren't just for spin-offs anymore. They're here to signify a climax of the main series. The electronic elements of Sonic's past are accompanied by rock and metal instruments that give this game a unique, edgy aesthetic that not many music artists would truly replicate until years later. But in case you think it's too radically different, you're in luck. Much of this game's soundtrack is directly taken from Sonic 3D Blast and completely bastardized. Oh wait, I said something negative about my favorite Sonic game. That means it's time for me to speak my mind. I actually don't like a lot of this game's soundtrack. Crazy, I know, since I was hyping it up from the first paragraph, but hear me out. Open Your Heart is fine, I have no complaints, but It Doesn't Matter is just kind of really bad. It's trying to be a modern take on hair metal, and I just cannot for the life of me find enjoyment out of it. And a majority of this game's soundtrack is kind of boring to me. There's a few standout tracks like Windy Hill and Emerald Coast, and Welcome to Station Square. Those 3 tracks are among the best in the series. When I first heard Welcome to Station Square, it fundamentally changed how I viewed the guitar. It's the song that I most associate with Sonic Adventure as a whole, when I forget about Windy Hill, which is my absolute favorite song in the game. Windy Hill Act 1 is so transcendent to me. It's up there with my top 5 songs in the series. But during this re-listening project, I found out that the song that plays during the Whack-A-Mole minigame is actually fire. I had no idea because I beat it first try, and the sound effects made it nearly inaudible. Also, shout out to this game's sad song called Event Sadness. Personally, if I were sad, I'd want it to be an event. A national holiday even. But not for real, this is a great song and is actually emotional. Too bad I hear of it and think of Piranha Plant's Lullaby from Mario 64, and also Jailer's Elegy from Ace Attorney, 2 other songs that I really like. I really like sad sounds, they're fun to me. And then Event Unbound did the same. I was sleeping on these cutscene tracks for real. Most of the cutscene tracks from Sonic Heroes onward are complete sleepers, but this game went hard for them. Casinopolis has some fun stuff, which is great because the stage itself sucks. Twinkle Park has some good songs. Fakery Way's gotta be my favorite because I love sad songs with piano and baby stock sound effects. At Dawn for Speed Highway is pretty nice, definitely one of the better level themes. Final Egg probably has the most consistent songs out of any stage, but largely the in-game music kinda lacks in my opinion, very few of them being memorable. All of them fit the game really well, but they're not things I'd listen to on my own. Most of the menu music is generic funk rock stuff, and while I can see the musicianship behind it, they're kinda boring if you spend enough time listening to J-Rock. They're not bad, but they're rarely anything special. Most of the boss themes are completely unimpressive, and if you want to compare the Genesis and Game Gear stuff from the era, they're not even as intense. They went too much for the rock direction and forgot metal existed. Chaos version 6 has the best song, and you're not going to get to the good part because the boss is over too fast. I even have a grudge against certain songs. Not just It Doesn't Matter, which still sucks, but like the Mystic Ruins Overworld theme, I had to hear it so much because it's easily the place where the player will first not know what the fuck to do, so they'll spend a long time listening to the same tribal vocals that are just really grating after a while. It's not a bad song, but every time I hear it I go a little bit more insane. But at the end of the day, I can only be so harsh on the thing. Memorability may be my top priority when it comes to music, but this stuff is pretty unassailable if you look at it with a critical lens. Nearly every song on here has at least one cool melodic idea, some identifying aspect that makes it unique. There's this part in the Egg Carrier where there's an orchestral cue that I really like that leads into a halftime breakdown with funny piano, and while I generally don't care for the song, I cannot deny how cool that section is. The other Egg Carrier one, the one with the trumpets, has cool piano also. I love when rock songs are composed entirely with instruments that would make up a big band, but there's also one other thing, the elephant in the room. It Doesn't Matter and Open Your Hearts aren't the only vocal tracks. Boy, oh boy, there's more than that, because this isn't just a Sonic game, this is a Sonic adventure. I've done enough shitting on It Doesn't Matter. I just have to say how cool Open Your Heart is. It's not my favorite by any means. I'm not really into the main guitar riff, but the vocal melodies are all great, and the guitar solos throughout are also really great. And then we have the other characters. Let's go in order of song quality, why don't we? First up, Eggman. Generic funk rock. Gets his vibe really well, I must say, but it's not really something I'm itching to hear again. Next, E102 Gamma. Really just not my thing. But just because it's not my thing doesn't mean I can't claim it has no redeeming qualities. It has no vocals, sure, I forgot about that, but what it does have is some sick piano parts. Even though it's not my style, I can commend that it's really cool for what it is. Gamma as a character also has a unique issue of having so many sound effects during normal gameplay that all the tracks from his campaign are completely inaudible. You gotta seek him out, and they're really not all that worth seeking out. Next up, Big the Cat. This is going to be crazy to hear, but I actually really like Big the Cat's soundtrack. It's got this really funny slide guitar that appears on most of his tracks. I like that to give him a unique identity. They were just like, quick, what if Fisherman like? And somebody whipped out a slide and they were like, perfect, that's Big the Cat right there. In fact, Big Fishes at Emerald Coast is one of my favorites on the soundtrack because of how stupid the hard rock song with distorted slide guitar is. It's so much fun. But yeah, his vocal track is entertaining, but not really all that special. It's good and fun, but it's no masterpiece like Amy Rose. Ever since she got that magical ring to age her up, she's become the best character in the series. Thank God that's canon. Thank you so much, Archie. But yeah, the song she has is good for no reason. My Sweet Passion is stupid as hell because they were just like, how do we make a girly song? And during this existential crisis, they arrived at not bubblegum pop, but funk for no reason. It's so funny. I love it so much. It's so catchy and perfectly encapsulates her character. Then we have two absolute masterpieces of songs. Tails, first off, has a pretty decent song called I Wanna Fly High, and it goes by no other title. I Wanna Fly High is a really great song with some fun guitar work and incredibly great vocals. It's also one of the few times where the lyrics are so unbelievably blunt that not even a child could miss the fact that it's just a direct retelling of Tails' arc in the game. I love Tails' campaign so much, you have no idea. It's both the most fun and has the best story, and the song really makes you feel like you just got an 8-year-old to take on the most threatening supervillain in the entire world. And finally, we have Unknown from ME. A stupid ass title because he's not from Master Emerald, he's from Angel Island, and he protects the Emerald. I don't know why it's called that, but the song itself, straight fire. The rough rap vocals are some of the few times where I can actually get behind rap. Is what I would say if Knuckles didn't have a consistent rap track record. The last rap verse in particular has some really funky rhythms to it. The chorus vocals are really nice and catchy and fit the song perfectly, and the instrumentals are great. I feel like the brass section alone gives the song an amazing feel that I can compare to very little else. This song is actually a masterpiece. Even if it has those classic cheesy lines like, I was born by myself, I don't need a posse, I get it on by myself, adversaries get shelved. Because, let's be real, even with the overwhelming amounts of cheese from lyrics like that, there's banger lines like, unlike Sonic I don't chuckle, I'd rather flex my muscles, which are just lyrical genius. But even with the inconsistencies of the lyrical tone, they still do a fantastic job at describing Knuckles' quite honestly amazing story. They encapsulate everything about him, from his need to be self-sufficient, to the overwhelming pressure of being the last surviving member of his race and having to protect the Emerald, to the general distrust that these events have caused him to have towards the people around him. And then at the very end of the soundtrack, there's the Chow Garden. You know, the thing that sucked in Adventure 1 but got better in 2, even though it was worse in 2 because the game's linear structure. Yeah, anyways, the Chow songs are kind of cool. The theme of Chow is nice, and the comedically titled Join Us for Happy Time is probably my favorite Chow song. I think Event Goodbye is also a Chow song, but I'm not sure since I didn't play Adventure 1 Chow Garden outside of what I had to do to get all the Steve achievements, which of course never involved me aborting any Chows, so it's good. I like it. With all that said, I'm not going to stop talking because I still got one more thing to mention. This game's genre diversity is actually insane. Having Casinopolis be a jazz-based stage, Windy Hill being a peaceful, majestic-sounding stage, and having Red Hot Skull be this 90s hip-hop instrumental banger, just like, even if the majority of the soundtrack doesn't impress me, it doesn't bore me ever. It's so eclectic and covers such a wide variety of stuff that no matter what kind of folk you like to stroke, there's something here for you. I cannot in good conscience put this any lower, even if I do feel like it's carried hard by like 6 songs. Alright, now I'll stop talking about my favorite Sonic game. 12. Sonic Advance. I was waiting for any of the main stage songs to miss. They refused. Neo Green Hill Zone is such a unique take on the first level theme, it's really great. Secret Base Zone is funky as hell and has a great secret bass line. Ice Mountain 2 isn't as good as Act 1, but that's understandable because Act 1 was a tough act to follow. Angel Island is this game's only miss, and it's okay. Egg Rocket is intense as hell, starting from the amazing intro and never dropping off afterwards. But you'll notice I skipped one. Casino Paradise. That's because Casino Paradise is fucking amazing. Casino songs in the series are super hit and miss, and this is the series' greatest hit. Act 1 is brilliantly upbeat swing tune with a fantastic solo, and Act 2 is this more chill jazz song with a completely different but still fantastic solo. They're like two halves of Little Caesar's Batman Calzone, which of course is the perfect pizza pie. The song called Knuckles Boss is also a cool non-stage theme. I don't remember it existing in game though. In general, this game is a really good soundtrack, and it used the GBA sound chip really well, especially the bass throughout. The GBA had the worst possible bass samples, so they wisely opted to use square and sawtooth waves instead of any kind of bass sample, which was really a good decision. 11. Sonic Runners. I had no idea that this game had such bangers because nobody except Pat Mac has ever talked about it. Beyond the Speed Of is a fantastic main theme for the game, and it would make a great vocal track if that was the only way to get people excited. But since it isn't, it remains very exciting and fun. But they follow it up on the OST with Fly Away, which is a Lost World reminiscent piano-led rock song, and it's actually better than anything from that game. A sentiment that can also be applied to the absolutely brilliant Spring Emotions. Spring Emotions lives up to its title by being an emotional odyssey. Despite being definitely rock, the orchestra and piano really bring out emotions. Which emotions? You figure it out. Power Ride is an energetic romp that is everything Sonic Riders should have been, carried hard by its ridiculously good bassline and piano melody. And then What to Do Today is a fun rock song, but nothing really all that special, but it's still fun. And then we get to Volume 2. Volume 2 features Go Quickly, which is my favorite on the entire soundtrack. It'd be right at home at Sonic Adventure 2. Brilliant guitar work throughout. The chord progressions all resolve so brilliantly, it gets me so pumped up. Then that's followed by Fiery Passion, which has a funky as hell bassline. End of Summer opens with a beautiful piano, and then has a section that sounds like Scott the Woz G4 intro. And then when it comes back for a second time, they do a radio filter, which gets you excited for the next thing, and then we have a brilliant key change. Strange Paradise is comparatively not much, but it's still very catchy. And then everything else is pretty good. I named like 90% of the tracks, and I have something good to say about nearly all of them. I was not expecting a mobile game to be this high. This is a masterpiece of a soundtrack. I say with no exaggeration, if you like Sonic music after the Genesis era, this has something for you, and you will love listening to it. I'm wrong about my opinions a lot when it comes to Sonic music, but I assure you, this soundtrack is not one of those times where I'm wrong about loving it. 10. Sonic Drift 2. Guys, hear me out. Sonic Drift 2 contains some of the best songs in the series, and literally nobody has ever told me about it until I made this list. The options theme? Actual fire. Balloon Panic Course? What does that even mean? Why is it so majestic? Why is Rainy Savannah Course the most beautiful chiptune to grace the Game Gear? Ice Cap Zone, Emerald Ocean, Hilltop, Emerald Hill, Quake Cave, Milky Way Course. They can't get away with this. That final GP music is a remix of the final boss from Sonic 3, and it's the only remix track in the game. Out of all the songs to reuse, they chose the most metal possible one to make it seem really climactic. I don't know anything about the game, but that seems like a really cool way to wrap up a racing adventure, unless the game is bad, in which case the soundtrack is making it seem too cool for its own good. This shouldn't be allowed. The game that literally 2 people have played, and yet it's so good. This is the biggest hidden gem that I've ever been informed of. I had no idea. Not every song is perfect, sure. If the Deoxys Prime uploads are anything to go by, there's some timing issues. Casino Night and Mystic Cave aren't the best, and each loop is like 20 seconds at most. But each and every song on here is so good in its own way, and the worst of it is still better than the best songs of any other game. I will perpetually be upset that the soundtrack has been hidden away from me for all this time. 9. Sonic Heroes. Heroes is an underrated game, I think. It's a Sonic adventure game with some gimmicky controls that actually make a lot of sense once you get used to them, but it does take like 2 hours to get used to them, so I understand. And its soundtrack is the continuation of the best musical identity Sonic has ever had throughout his history. Starting with the vocal themes, the absolute highlight since they're all so good, Sonic Heroes is the main theme of the game. Sonic Heroes is an illegally catchy song. It has no right being that catchy. You hear the word Sonic Heroes and you will sing the chorus. It's human nature. I don't really know how to talk about it because it's Sonic Heroes. What else do you need? We Can is a really funny song because it has the worst lyrics ever. The lyrics are literally just the instruction manual to the game. The only thing that it's missing from the instruction manual is the line about Eggman being a feminist. They really should have included that. Personally, I would change the lyrics from "If everyone can do something special, the secret is sharing our dreams" to "Press the Z button to switch characters. Equal rights for women is one of Eggman's dreams." I think it would flow really well. But yeah, the vocals are comedically bad in the best way possible, from the lyrics to the hilarious delivery, but oh my god, the song is just so good. It's so upbeat and happy. It's everything I'd want from this team. Follow Me is an interesting recharacterization for Amy. I'm glad they didn't reuse My Sweet Passion for the 3rd game in a row, instead giving her a song reminiscent of I Wanna Fly High version 2. It's got a fantastic guitar solo, and the vocals are really solid throughout. I love Amy. Team Chaotix is up next because I said so. It's okay. It's definitely the weakest of the 4, but it's still pretty good. When this is your worst vocal track, you know you've done well. It's kinda just a standard rock song. It's not really all that exciting, but it's not bad. I wish the verses weren't so melodically minimalist, but the chorus is really quite nice. Then we have This Machine. This Machine is absolutely brilliant. Because each song has to account for the musical identities of all 3 characters on the team, it's kind of difficult to come up with each of these. Team Chaotix was easy because they kind of didn't have a pre-established musical identity, their only other game being a Knuckles game first and foremost. Sonic and Tails were both kind of similar in tone, so the song being a standard fun rock song worked. I personally think Follow Me could have been a little closer to Amy, but I mean, sure, Big the Cat is there, so I guess having it be a rock song with female vocals is good enough, especially since Cream didn't have a pre-established musical identity either. And then we have This Machine. This machine utilizes instruments and compositional cues from both Shadow and E102 Gamma's musical history to represent him and E102 123 Omegas, not Gamma. They Gamma's dead, I'm sorry to say. It didn't have any Rouge elements, but I'll hold my tongue. Because this song is fantastic. It's so catchy. It has some of the heaviest riffs in the entire series. It's perfectly edgy and brilliant. I love it so much, and I can't recommend it enough. Now for the actual game. We have quite a few bangers. Seaside Hill is so good. Fantastic guitar melodies, to the point where one of the motifs in the song was stolen for Fist Bump and Forces. It was too good not to reuse. I also really like Casino Park, and apparently at one point, I liked Power Plant. I don't now. Frog Forest and Lost Jungle have cool percussion. The rest is kinda just not my thing. Kinda boring, but definitely not bad. I'd say this has more than enough good songs to make up for its weaker parts. That's it. Until the climax of the game, What I'm Made Of. It's pretty good. Sounds like Night of the Wind, but that song's better, so. 8. Knuckles Chaotix. This is the most underrated soundtrack in the series, I think, but to the enlightened few who know it exists, you know I'm right. Nice Meeting You is literally a Super Mario World song, and it's very funny. This Horizon is a great opening stage song, and it gets you excited for the frustrating journey that I'm pretty sure this game is. I haven't played it, so I'm going off the word of the game apologist here. This game heavily relies on a leitmotif that's not really my favorite in the entire world, which gives me major Sonic and Knuckles flashbacks. Every game Knuckles is a part of has a majority of its soundtrack that use leitmotifs. There's a couple bad songs like Child Song and Crystal Nightmare, but there's also a handful of absolute bangers like Seascape and Door into Summer. Pendulum is a nice boss theme, which are hard to come by in this series. Surging Power is a banger, but Destructive Power sucks dick. Make sure you don't confuse them. Bang Surging Power and suck Destructive Power. Do not mix them up. Just Another Day is also a much more impressive song than the title may make it seem. It's a great medley, one of the best credits medleys in the series. This is a really great soundtrack if you're okay skipping lackluster stuff and going straight to the bangers. There's some boring ones here, but that's fine I think, because they're not a majority of the soundtrack. Upon re-listening, I realized how many good tracks there were and just how fun they all are. This is a soundtrack you'd listen to if you just want to have a good time. It's so fun. 7. Sonic Forces. Hey look, it's the most unnecessarily overhated game in the entire series, both the game and the soundtrack. People like to point at this game and pretend that because it has some dubstep inspiration that it's the devil in the worst Sonic soundtrack. I'm not one of those people. It's at number 7. This game's okay at worst, and the soundtrack is more than okay. It's actually amazing. Fist Bump, the primary target of abuse outside of the first stage. Fist Bump is an incredibly catchy and energetic, not to mention objectively the fastest vocal theme. It's so fun. It's honestly a better song than the game deserves. There's one melody that's a direct callback to Sonic Heroes, which is neat. The lyrics are bad, but it's also a Sonic song, so what did you expect? But that's where the piano rendition comes in. The piano version of Fist Bump is one of the most beautiful things in the entire series. I'm biased because I love the piano, but like, fuck, it's so good. Please listen to it. Faded Hills is that other target of abuse I was talking about. It's fun and catchy. I don't know what people's problem is. Fighting Onward Spaceport is an amazing song, easily my favorite in the game. There's one particular drum breakdown that recontextualizes the main melody in such a fantastic way that it gets me every time, and the vocals are great. Nowhere to Run also has good vocals and a nice piano. Virtual Enemies Capital City is just a living Tombstone song, and I've always found that really funny. Network Terminal Interior is funky as hell. Infinite, on the other hand, is deserving of its cringe status. It's funny and cringy, but it's fun. I love Linkin Park. But outside of those, I'm not going to go into detail about every song I like, but keep in mind there's at least 20 actual bangers in the soundtrack that carry it to glory in my eyes. This game uses vocal tracks as regular stage themes, and they're consistently really good. There's also a fair bit of Genesis-inspired songs that sound like modern takes on chiptune for some reason, that are also consistently good. If you're a huge fan of boring orchestral cutscene music that provides no value when removed from the context of the game, it's got that too. This truly feels like a collection of everything Sonic does well at once, with the exception of some of the lesser utilized genres like New Jack Swing and Eurobeat. Sonic's had a diverse musical history, so it's cool that they're at least trying to get more than one style. There's a very clear focus on electronic and dubstep elements in this game, but they do not shy away from the traditional rock and Genesis styles, which is really cool. But as you may have caught, the soundtrack is not free from the way too many cutscene songs. They're consistently not good. The "this is a serious war" vibe that the game goes for outside of the stages themselves does not really work. Roger Craig Smith era Sonic was not built for this serious vibe they were going for. The worst parts of the soundtrack sound like something that would accompany a Ken Penders era Sonic comic, but the best of the soundtrack places it where it is. 6. Sonic Mania. Honestly, in completely good faith, I could just say Studiopolis Zone Act 1 and have that be my entire justification for this placement. Studiopolis Zone is one of the absolute highlights of the game, gameplay and music-wise. The song is so amazingly catchy, and it proves that when done right, New Jack Swing is 2D Sonic's best friend. But that piano solo, though. That piano solo has been my favorite single instance of piano in any song for close to half a decade. It's so good. Blossom Haze has long stood out as one of my favorite tracks just because it's so damn chill and funky at the same time. It's a vibe that's only really been done in CD, and so why does it seem so low? Reused tracks. Most of the Genesis tracks that are reused for this game are honestly done worse than their Genesis counterparts. Flying Battery is missing the bass that the Genesis had, Hydro City Act 1 feels kinda empty somehow, Green Hill is back and who cares, and that's really holding it back from true greatness. Every original track is fantastic, and the sections for reused songs are pretty good choices. Hell, even some of the remixes are better than the originals, like Hydrocity Act 2 and Lava Reef Act 1, and Stardust Speedway, but in the end, it's hard to give a game whose ideas were established 2 decades prior too much credit. Plus, as the resident I don't like Sonic CD guy, the Sonic CD inspired tracks like Titanic Monarch and every CD cover don't do much for me. And one of the best songs in the game, Egg Panicky, is sound test only. Look, this soundtrack is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but it's not as perfect as some people may pretend it is. 5. Sonic Mania Plus. It's Sonic Mania, but with a couple more songs, I think. 4. Sonic 2 Genesis. You can tell that this is an immediate upgrade from Sonic 1 music-wise from the literal first stage. Emerald Hill has one of the funkiest bass lines in video game history, and it carries the already amazing melody line. Emerald Hill may potentially be the best opening stage theme I've ever heard. It has no right going that hard. And then the game continues by not missing a single time. Chemical Plant? Funky banger. Aquatic Ruin? More like Aquatic Fix. Casino Night? Really makes you feel like gambling. Hilltop opens with the Genesis doing an impression of a sex moan. Mystic Cave brings the banger bassline count up to 3. Oil Ocean sucks, I'm not even gonna say anything. And if you didn't think that was enough, let me remind you, there's a second soundtrack featuring some of the most proportionally underrated songs in the series. You think, given how popular this one was, that people would talk about the 2-player Casino Night. But alas, while the first game had a short soundtrack and had to make sure that they were all good, this game features an entire 2-player mode that doubles the soundtrack's length. And they're still pretty much all good, including a version of Emerald Hill that sounds incredibly similar to Never Gonna Give You Up. Shout out to 2-player Sky Chase for being one of the most peaceful songs I've ever heard. It's so good. While I want to retain my title of being the only living human being who thinks Sonic 2 is worse than Sonic 1, I cannot in good faith rank the soundtrack below it. The soundtrack is unbelievably iconic. 3. Sonic 1 Game Gear Master System. They are the same. Yes, I really did put this that high. It may not be as iconic as the Genesis one, but it is still better in every way, and contains a grand total of 0 bad songs. If you doubt me or my placement, just listen to Bridge Zone. Even people who don't take this game seriously, people I like to call missing out, know that Bridge Zone is a banger. It's so catchy and happy and uplifting. I wish it came back for any future entries. I would do anything to hear a modern rendition of it, but if happy and upbeat aren't your thing, that's what Skybase Zone is for. Skybase Zone is fast and intense and catchy and metal as fuck while still being atmospheric as a Game Gear Master System game could be. This game is a masterclass in chiptune songwriting because nearly every song fits the level it's a part of and stands on its own at the same time. I don't even know how they do it. I literally can't say even a single flaw with the soundtrack. The songs loop too quickly. I want more of these songs because they're too damn good. Marble Zone is the worst on the soundtrack, but it goes unused, so I can't even complain about it. Green Hill is a downgrade from the Genesis, but some people in the comments say it's better, and it's not like they had any choice but to downgrade it. The Game Gear can't make a Genesis sound. That's not how it works. The Game Gear and Master System have an actually horrible sound chip. When you hear modern day chiptune songs, you're nearly always going to see people emulating the NES or Famicom Disk System, because nobody wants to be using the god-awful Game Gear sound chip, and yet they made these miraculously brilliant songs. I have no reservations putting this soundtrack so high. I'm right. 2. Sonic R. Eurodance is not my style at all. And yet this is pretty easily one of the best soundtracks ever. Nearly every track is a vocal track, and they're nearly all great, but if you don't like the vocals, the OST features the instrumentals, and let me tell you, there's some fantastic instrumentals. When I was in middle school, I'd specifically jam out to the instrumental of Can You Feel the Sunshine, because I was this exact type of person who didn't like the vocals. Listening to the instrumentals made clear a lot of the subtler details that are all really cool, like the sine wave in the back of the chorus that itself is a fantastic melody. Can You Feel the Sunshine also has a really nice B section around 3 minutes in that has more of a Latin sound, and it's so fucking cool. As an enlightened adult, I prefer the versions with vocals, but let me tell ya, there's some really good stuff, even if you listen to the instrumentals. I wish we got official releases of the amateur beta vocals, cause I kinda prefer the random Sega employee over the professional vocalist they hired, cause I kinda love amateur vocals, but whatever. These vocal melody lines are so brilliantly written that even if they were delivered by insert infamously bad singer here, they'd still be amazing. Living in the City is one of those songs that has both a fantastic chorus and fantastic verses, which is kind of a rarity. Work It Out is proof that it's a rarity because it's really carried by the chorus, although the instrumental track is really good too. Diamond in the Sky and Back in Time are both completely fine songs that I wouldn't mind listening to in the context of the game, but they're a little boring and overlong on their own. Supersonic Racing was genetically engineered to be the catchiest thing in the entire world. And then Number 1 is a pretty nice ending song for the game, very peaceful. The standout track of the game, in my opinion, is the Options theme. Holy shit. Absolutely one of the best bass lines in the series, and the drums continuously hit this really odd offbeat that gives this song a really unique, funky flavor that it's been nearly unmatched for the rest of the series. Sonic R is a game that not many people really care about, but nobody can deny the magnitude of its soundtrack. It screams 90s, and in my opinion, it represents the peak of the decade's music. I could not imagine a game without this soundtrack, and yet it flawlessly stands on its own merits. You could show most of these songs to non-Sonic fans without context, and they wouldn't dare question their legitimacy as music. And all of this is coming from a person who actively dislikes the genre that it is. It's good enough to transcend my genre bias, and that says more about it than I'm otherwise capable of describing. Number 1, Sonic Adventure 2. I mean, are you surprised? Where to start? As far as I'm concerned, this game has the best soundtrack without even a shadow of a doubt. If there's any differences in soundtrack between the versions of this game, pretend they don't exist, because as far as I'm concerned, they're all tied at this spot. Sonic Adventure 2 Battle? Sure, that's just as good. This is, from the second you boot up the game, infinitely better than any other soundtrack. Live and Learn has an insane guitar riff, and the second you hear it for the first time, you know it's cool as fuck, and also that it's the peak of Sonic music. But it's also perfectly encapsulating of Sonic as a character, lyrically, tonally, and even its usage in the game. This is the number 1 song I'd associate with Sonic. The song was flawlessly designed to be perfect as an encapsulation of his character, his optimistic and carefree attitude, and his inherent 90s coolness. It's also perfectly represented in this song. The central message of moving on, but not forgetting the steps that have gotten you to your current moment is brilliantly executed, and it's the perfect song to end the game as a whole. I could, and many have, filibuster here to talk about how good the story is, but I'm trying to focus on the music here. Just trust me that in the context of the game, Live and Learn is literally the peak of video games. And that's just one vocal track. There's multiple. There's new characters after all, so we gotta give them new songs. First up we got Rouge and... well, wait a minute, because every character has their own genres that all of their stages fall into. No matter what your favorite genre is, at least one of these characters will be up your alley. Unless your favorite genre is classical, then may I interest you in Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric? Anyways, Rouge is 100% my favorite. I've said it a couple times in this video already, but Rouge, she's sexy and smooth. Knuckles said so himself. Just trust me on this. So rarely do you see jazz in video games, and literally nowhere but Rouge's soundtrack, Persona isn't real, it can't dispute my point, is it done well. But when I say done well, I mean done so unbelievably well that they're some of the best jazz songs to ever exist. I don't think I've mentioned it so far, but I don't like jazz, and yet Rouge is 100% my favorite. First up, the vocal track. Fly in the Freedom. Fly in the Freedom is my literal favorite vocal track in the series. I know I've sung the praises of Unknown from ME and like every other vocal song, but no. Fly in the Freedom is my favorite vocal track, full stop, no question. It doesn't have the best lyrics or anything, but it does thoroughly explain what her deal is. But more importantly, the instrumental is just actively amazing. The percussion is insane, as any legitimate drummer could tell you. There's some fantastic setups, and the fast bossa nova section is somehow the easiest thing to do out of anything in the song, despite itself being a beginner drummer's worst nightmare. Meanwhile, the entire outro just builds on itself and continues rising in scale, with more instruments and vocal lines being added. The vocals themselves are so beautiful, and they're backed up by the best jazz instrumentals of all time. And that's to say nothing of the banger bass line, which I'm avoiding discussing because it's kind of a running theme with Sonic Adventure 2. The rest of Rouge's stages have a similar jazz vibe, and they're pretty much all bangers. I'd love to say which ones are the standouts, but they all have dumb titles like 34 degrees north, 12 degrees east, and so you're really just gonna have to trust me on this. Every Rouge song is amazing. Most of them feature really great vocal scatting, and the jazz instrumentals are consistently solid throughout. If you're not turned on by her design, you'll be turned on by her soundtrack. Knuckles, the Eternal Chuckler. This guy is hilarious. So remember Sonic Adventure 1 when I said Unknown from ME is the best vocal song in that game? Yeah, it's one of the weakest here. Sonic Adventure 2 does this thing where they do a newer version of all the vocal tracks from Adventure 1, with the odd exception of Amy, who has the same song for some reason, probably because she's not playable. Unknown from ME version 2 is by far the weaker version. There's a more electronic production to it, and I really don't like the changes. I like the rawer, older hip-hop reminiscent instrumentals from the old version. It's more raw and rugged, which is what Knuckles is. He's not a techno guy, which is why the rest of his soundtrack is fittingly rap-focused. With all-time classics such as the immortal Pumpkin Hill, which, believe it or not, is one of my least favorites, God, Knuckles just has banger after banger. Even its weak ones are damn good. Aquatic Mine is an incredibly chill vibe that always puts me at ease. It's amazing. Meanwhile, whenever I heard the word Knuckles, I immediately go, Echidna! That's what I'm representing. Never seen a Mike Hog spitting like a menace. Wild Canyon fun, I gotta chase a bat, huh? Yeah, Rouge, she's sexy and smooth. It flows so well, I gotta do the whole thing. The lyrics are so consistently stupid because they're literally just Knuckles saying what he's doing, and it's hilarious. But then for these bad lyrics, they put the best rap instrumentals of all time? They're so good, I swear. I'm not even a rap guy. To Pimp a Butterfly is the only Kendrick album I've ever heard. I'm such a virgin with rap that Knuckles manages to be the top of my rap rankings. Putting those two sentences back to back may put me on a watch list because it correctly implies that I prefer Knuckles rap stuff to Pimp a Butterfly. Knuckles the fucking echidna. Too bad about the guy delivering these lines. Next up, we got Tails. Tails is relatively weak soundtrack-wise, but only relatively. He's got a very electronic rock sound, which, I mean, whatever, it's some fine stuff, but it often feels like a lesser imitation of Sonic and Shadow's music. I say both because it feels like a combination of both styles. I don't think it fits his character, but it makes sense since he's in a robot suit, and it draws parallels with Eggman, who is similar in gameplay and soundtrack to Tails. Really, what differentiates Eggman and Tails are their vocal tracks. Tails' vocal track, I Wanna Fly High version 2, again, going by no other title, it's called I Wanna Fly High. I'm right, it's so good. It's an improvement to what was already an amazing song. It doesn't really fit his character arc in this game, which is all the more reason to say it's called I Wanna Fly High because he already believes in himself. Dude's an 8-year-old and he's a literal genius. He can build a plane and he toppled Eggman in the first game. Did you see what Eggman did in the first game? But yeah, I love the guitar work on this song so much. It's incredibly catchy power pop and it's got a banger guitar solo. But if you want to talk banger guitar solos, Eggman's theme has the literal best guitar solo ever delivered in a Sonic track. For no reason. It's so good. The rest of the song doesn't do much for me. I Am the Eggman just doesn't have the same resonating power of I Am the Walrus, but again, banger guitar solo. Next up, we have fan favorite Shadow. Hot take, but I don't like Shadow's soundtrack. You probably already knew that, given how much I criticized Shadow the Hedgehog for being boring. I just think it's overly edgy and overly electronic. It's not my thing. Throw It All Away gotta be one of the worst songs in the game, for real, for real. And this leads us to our favorite non-Shadow Hedgehog, Amy Rose. Oh wait, I already talked about Amy, so I guess I'll do our second favorite non-Shadow Hedgehog, Sonic. Sonic's soundtrack alone would have brought this game to #1. Rouge didn't even have to bring out better jazz tunes than every big band ever made. Knuckles didn't even have to outsell Kanye. Sonic alone could have brought this to the top with banger after banger in his stages. Technically, the first song you hear is Event Let's Make It, which is an amazing ska rendition of something I'll hold off on. Then you get launched straight into Escape from the City, which is the best opening level song that you could possibly put into a game. There's a reason everyone and their grandmother knows it. It's a classic. Metal Harbor, banger songs. Mission Street, banger. Whatever the hell Chasing Drive 4 Kart is a banger too. The style of rock they were going for in Adventure 1 was ramped up to 11 in this game and nearly perfected. Every song has this transcendent guitar work and amazingly catchy and exciting melodies. There's not a second of breathing room, because every song is prime built to inject adrenaline straight into your veins. But then we have It Doesn't Matter. Remember that song I claimed was hot trash in Adventure 1? Yeah, version 2 is amazing, to the point where I did a cover of it on my channel, and it doing somewhat well is the sole reason I'm making this video. First off, the bass line is insane. Like, actually insane. Whoever came up with this bass line is actually the sexiest person alive. It's pristine. Meanwhile, the guitar solo is so brilliantly catchy, being just flashy enough to impress any first-time listener, but just catchy enough to be melodically impressive. Sonic solos don't do the how many notes can I play all at once thing, and they never overuse any particular gimmick. They're amazingly creative and put melodic ideas at the forefront before anything else, making it perfect for re-listening to the solos, because they're just additions. They're not just like showing off and, oh, that's cool one time and then it grows stale. It's something you want to listen to on repeat because it's just inherently a good melody. And the vocal line is so catchy, it's insane. I listened to it about 80 times in the span of 2 months to do my cover of it, and to this day I'm not sick of it because it's just that damn good. It Doesn't Matter version 2 blows the first version out of the water so hard, and I often feel like I'm the only one who sees it. This is what I get for being a Weezer fan. The deeper you dig into this game's soundtrack, the more it gives you in return. There's a few mediocre ones, I'm not gonna pretend that there aren't, but the soundtrack's like 80 or 90 songs long. It'd be impossible to make all of them amazing, and I'd say a good majority are. Not half, but more than half are amazing. This is such an impressive collection of music with insane genre diversity, that if not attached to a video game property, it would be considered an all-time magnum opus of songwriting. It stands on its own outside of the game, and yet still perfectly fits in the game. Every song fits the character and what they're doing in the game, the cutscene music's typically great, and the vocal tracks somehow fit into a video game. Do you know how hard it is to put vocal tracks into a video game and have it fit? Only Sonic can do it. This is truly the best Sonic soundtrack. There's not a doubt in my mind. It's so far ahead of everything else that it's kind of not even fair. So with all that said and done, what did we learn today? That my opinions are bad? Yeah, that's a good point. Really, I learned not to make an hour-long video essay and follow it up by doubling the length of its sequel. I was going to do a ranking every Mario soundtrack next, but there's like 223 Mario games. There were only 88 here. I'm only doing that if I hit 1 million views on this. I can't put myself through this torture otherwise. Thank God I'm not hitting that.